Hello there, and welcome back. I'm so glad you've joined me again. Tonight, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're stepping away from the purely biological, the tangible world of leaf and cell, and we're starting our journey in the world of literature. We're venturing into the foggy, gaslit streets of Victorian London, and then far beyond to the windswept coast of Cornwall, in the company of the world's most famous consulting detective. We're here to talk about Sherlock Holmes, and a mystery that has haunted the edges of botany and toxicology for over a century. The strange case of the devil's foot root. It's a story of a plant so potent, so terrifying, that its very smoke can drive a person to madness or death. This is the first part of a much longer exploration, a deep dive into a literary horror to see if we can find its real-world counterpart. I'm hoping you'll stick with me for the entire journey. And if you enjoy what we do here, these quiet late-night investigations into the marvels of the world, perhaps consider liking the video or subscribing. It's a small, silent gesture that means a great deal. And as always, I love to know who I'm speaking with in the dark. So, if you feel inclined, maybe leave a comment telling me what part of the world you're listening from tonight. It's a lovely thought. All of us, dotted across the globe, settling in for the same story. But that can wait. For now, the most important thing is for you to get comfortable. Let the weight of the day settle, and then release it. Find that perfect cool spot on your pillow. Let your shoulders fall, and take a slow, deep breath. We are about to begin a story of a brilliant but flawed detective, a loyal doctor, and a poison that seemed to spring not from the earth, but from the pages of a nightmare. So dim the lights, close your eyes, and let's travel back in time, to a small cottage in Cornwall, where a mystery is about to unfold. Chapter 1. The Literary Genesis. Deconstructing the Adventure of the Devil's Foot. Our story begins not with a crime, but with a prescription. It is the spring of 1897. And Sherlock Holmes, the great detective, the calculating mind of Baker Street, is unwell. His doctor, worried about a potential collapse from overwork and, as Watson delicately puts it, occasional indiscretions of his own, has ordered him to take a complete rest. No cases, no London fog, no violin concertos at 3 a.m, just rest. And the place chosen for this convalescence is a small cottage at Poldhu Bay, on the rugged, windswept coast of Cornwall. It is a place of stark and ancient beauty. Try to picture it with me. Imagine the scent of the air. It's not the scent of the city, heavy with coal smoke and horses. This air is sharp, clean, and tastes of salt. You can hear the constant, rhythmic whisper of the waves on the shingle beach, a sound that has been shaping this coastline for millennia. Above you, the sky is vast, and the cry of gulls is a lonely, piercing sound. The landscape itself is primal. Great grey granite tors, ancient hills of stone, rise from the moorland, their surfaces covered in a tapestry of gorse and lichen. It feels like the very bones of the world are exposed here. This is a deliberate choice of setting by our author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He isn't just giving his characters a holiday. He is isolating them. He is placing them in a landscape that feels older than civilization. A place of folklore and superstition, where the line between the natural and the supernatural feels thin. It's a place where you can believe that a plant called the devil's foot might actually grow. Holmes, of course, is meant to be resting. He and his faithful companion, Dr. Watson, spend their days taking long, bracing walks along the cliff paths, observing the ancient stone huts of a forgotten people, and exploring the stark beauty of the moor. But you can't truly turn off a mind like Sherlock Holmes. He is a thinking machine, and without a problem to solve, that machine begins to rust. He grows bored, restless. He lies on the cliff tops, his sharp hawk-like face turned to the sky, his mind hungry for a puzzle. As Watson notes, he is a panther in a cage, and he chafes at the idleness. The peace of the countryside is, for him, a kind of torment. It is into this simmering atmosphere of restless genius and ancient landscapes that the mystery arrives. And it arrives, as it so often does in these stories, in the form of a visitor. One bright spring morning, As Holmes and Watson are finishing their breakfast, two men appear at their cottage door. They are Mr. Mortimer Tregennis, a local gentleman, and Mr. Roundhay, the vicar of the nearby parish of Tredannick Wallace. Their faces are pale, their demeanour frantic. They are bursting with a story so bizarre, so utterly terrifying, that it immediately shakes Holmes from his lethargy. The game, as he would say, is afoot. Mr. Tregennis relates the events of the previous night. He had been playing cards, whist with his two brothers, Owen and George, and his sister Brenda, at their family home, a place called Tredannick Water. He says he left them around 10 o'clock, leaving them in high spirits, still seated around the card table in their sitting room. He walked home, a journey across the moor. But this morning, the vicar, Mr. Roundhay, woke him with the most dreadful news imaginable. Let's pause here and allow the scene to form in our minds, as described by the horrified vicar. He tells of how the housekeeper at Tredannick Water had woken to find the house strangely silent. When she went to the sitting room, she was met with a sight of pure, unadulterated horror. The window was open, the lamp was still lit, casting a pale, sickly light in the morning sun, and around the card table sat the three Tredannis siblings, just as Mortimer had left them. But they were not as he left them. The two brothers, Owen and George, were slumped in their chairs, leaning back, their faces twisted into masks of utter convulsive terror. Their eyes were wide, staring, and their mouths were open, as if frozen in a final silent scream. But there was something else, something even more disturbing. Their features, Watson tells us, were contorted and grinning. It was a rictus of horror, but also impossibly of joy, a sight to curdle the blood. And then there was the sister, Brenda. She was still alive, but only just. She had been driven completely, hopelessly insane. She sat bolt upright in her chair, her hair, Watson notes, bristling from her head, her beautiful eyes now stellate and screaming with horror. She was laughing, a high, thin, continuous shriek of laughter that filled the terrible, silent room. She recognized no one. She understood nothing. Her mind had been utterly and irrevocably shattered, blasted by the same unimaginable terror that had stopped her brothers' hearts. This is the puzzle presented to Sherlock Holmes. What could possibly have happened in that locked room between 10 o'clock at night and sunrise? There is no sign of violence, no intruder, no weapon, just a room, a lamp, an open window, and three people, two dead and one insane, all bearing the same ghastly expression of joyful terror. The local doctor is baffled. He speaks of a sudden collective shock, a fright so profound it could kill. But a fright of what? Holmes is instantly energized. This is the intellectual challenge he has been craving. The boredom vanishes, replaced by that familiar keen-edged focus. He listens intently, his grey eyes shining, his long, thin fingers steepled before him. He identifies the core of the mystery immediately. It is not a question of who, not yet. It is a question of how. What force, what agent could enter a room and produce such specific and grotesque results? He travels with Watson and the others to the house, Tredannick Water, and here we see the master observer at work. While the local constable sees only a tragedy, Holmes sees a collection of clues, a story written in dust and detail. He examines everything: the room, the position of the bodies, the cards still on the table. He notes the stuffiness of the air, the lingering smell of the burning lamp. He looks for footprints outside the open window, but the ground is hard and dry. Then he notices something that everyone else has missed. There are signs that one of the men at the table, Mortimer Tregennis, the very man who brought them the case, had moved his chair back suddenly, as if he were trying to get away from something. And Holmes observes the fire in the grate. It had been lit that evening, even though it was a mild spring night. Why light a fire? The details begin to accumulate, but they don't form a coherent picture. Not yet. It's a series of disconnected facts, and the central horror remains unexplained. The nature of the deaths is so otherworldly that even the pragmatic doctor, Watson, finds himself whispering about demons and supernatural forces. He speaks of the shadow of some devilish possibility. and for once the idea doesn't seem so far-fetched. This is the power of Conan Doyle's storytelling. He, a trained physician and a man of science, creates a scenario that pushes right up against the boundaries of the rational. He makes us feel, along with Watson, that perhaps we have stumbled upon a force beyond human understanding. It is Mortimer Tregennis himself who provides the first real clue, though he doesn't realize it. As they are leaving the house, he mentions a falling out he had with his siblings. It was over money, the division of the family assets. He admits the argument was bitter. He left the house angry. This provides a motive, a very human and sordid crack in the supernatural facade, but it still doesn't explain the how. Then, a day later, comes the second act of the tragedy, and it is this act that brings us to the heart of our investigation. The vicar, Mr. Roundhay, comes rushing back to Holmes's cottage. He is beside himself with a new horror. Mortimer Tregennis, the survivor, the man who brought them the case, is now dead. He was found in his own room at the vicarage, where he had been staying, and he was found in exactly the same way as his brothers. Slumped in his chair, his face contorted into that same nightmare grin of ecstatic terror. Now Holmes knows he is dealing with a murderer, a human agent, someone who was at the vicarage that morning, and he knows how the poison, for it must be a poison, was administered. He races to the vicarage and examines the room where Mortimer Tregennis died. And there on the windowsill, just above the dead man's chair, he finds a few grains of reddish-brown powder like snuff. And in the lamp in the center of the room, he finds the final damning clue. There is a deposit of the same brown ash on top of the lamp's glass chimney. The method is suddenly, brilliantly clear. The murderer threw a pinch of this strange powder onto the hot glass of the lit lamp. The heat caused the powder to smolder, to vaporize, releasing a toxic fume into the enclosed space of the room. The victims, sitting around the table, would have inhaled this fume without even realizing it. It was a silent, invisible, and utterly diabolical weapon. This is a piece of masterful deduction, but it only deepens the central mystery. What is this powder? Where does it come from? Holmes, in his inquiries, learns that Mortimer Tregennis had recently been visited by a man named Dr. Leon Sterndale. Sterndale is a famous explorer and naturalist, a man who has spent years in the deepest, most remote parts of Africa, a man who collects rare and unusual specimens of flora and fauna. The pieces are clicking into place. The motive was not just money, it was a crime of passion, a story of love and betrayal involving Brendan Tregennis and Dr. Sterndale, and the evil interference of her brother Mortimer. But for our purposes, the human drama is secondary to the botanical horror at its center. Holmes confronts Dr. Sterndale, and the great explorer confesses everything. He reveals the name of the poison he used to exact his revenge on Mortimer, the same poison Mortimer had used on his own family. The name he gives it is Radix pedis diaboli, in Latin, the root of the devil's foot. And now we arrive at the core of this chapter, the literary genesis of the plant we've come to investigate. Sterndale describes the root. He tells Holmes he collected it in the Ubangi region of West Africa, a place known for its potent ordeal poisons used in tribal justice. He describes it as a reddish-brown powder, derived from the root of a plant. He calls it a vegetable alkaloid, a compound so toxic that Western science has no known record of it, and no antidote. He explains its terrible effects. When burned, its fumes attack the very center of the brain that controls our emotions, specifically the center for fear. It doesn't just make you afraid, it generates an absolute, pure, and overwhelming terror. A terror so immense, so soul-destroying, that the mind cannot possibly contain it. The experience is so alien, so monstrous, that it drives the victim instantly insane, and for those with a weaker constitution, a weaker heart, the shock is enough to kill them outright. The nervous system is simply overloaded, and the heart stops. Think about the sheer ingenuity of this creation. From a storytelling perspective, Conan Doyle, with his medical training, understood that a poison didn't have to attack the body directly. The most terrifying poison would be one that attacks the mind, one that turns your own consciousness into a torture chamber. He imagines a substance that doesn't cause pain, but causes the idea of pain, the idea of a terror so profound it becomes a physical reality. The grinning, contorted faces of the victims are the outward sign of this internal war. The brain is screaming in horror while simultaneously being flooded with a kind of delirious manic energy, resulting in that ghastly fusion of terror and joy. The story reaches its climax in what is perhaps one of the most famous and most reckless scenes in the entire Sherlock Holmes canon. Holmes, ever the empiricist, the man who believes only what he can test, decides that he and Watson must experience the effects of the poison for themselves. It is an act of incredible scientific curiosity and almost suicidal bravado. He has recovered a sample of the devil's foot powder from Dr. Sterndale. Back at their cottage, he places a small pinch of it upon the lit lamp. He and Watson sit down with their watches to time the effects. Let's try to be in that room with them. The windows are closed. The only light is from the lamp, which now has a small, smouldering pile of brown powder on its chimney. A thin, greasy, bluish smoke begins to curl upwards. Watson describes a peculiar, subtle, and rather nauseating odor, musky and sweet. For a few moments, nothing happens. They sit in silence, the only sound the ticking of their watches and the whisper of the sea outside. Then, the change begins. Watson writes of a sense of great depression. A heavy weight seems to settle on him, a feeling of vague and immense sadness. But then it deepens. The sadness gives way to a sense of impending doom. He feels a cloud of black gloom enveloping him. His mind is filled with formless fears and a vague sense of horrible expectation. This is the genius of the description. The terror isn't of something specific. It's not a monster or a memory. It is the raw emotion of fear itself, distilled and weaponized. It's the feeling you might have in a nightmare, where you are running from something you can't see, a dread that has no name and no face, but is all the more powerful for it. For Holmes, the effect is even more dramatic. Watson sees his friend's face set like a mask of granite. His eyes are fixed on a corner of the room, wide with an indescribable horror. He seems to be seeing something that isn't there. Then his nerves give way. Holmes, the man of logic and steel, leaps from his chair, screaming and clawing at the air, his face a reflection of the same madness he saw on the Tregennis family. It is only Watson's medical instinct and his loyalty that saved them. He realizes they are succumbing to the poison. With the last of his strength, he grabs Holmes and drags him, fighting and raving, out of the cottage and into the fresh, clean air of the Cornish coast. They collapse on the grass, gasping, their minds slowly, painfully, returning to reality. The sea air, the solid feel of the earth beneath them, brings them back from the brink of madness. When they recover, Holmes is pale and shaken, but his scientific curiosity is, unbelievably, intact. "It is not a pleasant experience, Watson," he says, with a masterpiece of understatement. He admits that he saw shapes and felt a loathsome depression that threatened to unseat his reason. He has proven his theory. He has felt the devil's foot. The story concludes with Holmes deciding to let Dr. Sterndale go. He sees the man's actions as a form of cosmic justice. Sterndale returns to Africa, taking the last of his terrible poison with him, and the case is closed. But for us, it is just the beginning. So let's deconstruct what we have. We have a plant, specifically a root, from West Africa. It produces a reddish-brown powder. When this powder is burned, it releases a potent psychoactive alkaloid. The method of delivery is inhalation of the smoke. The effects are primarily neurological and psychological. It induces a state of extreme terror, paranoia, and hallucination. This state is so severe that it can lead to permanent insanity or death by cardiac arrest due to shock. This is the literary blueprint. Conan Doyle, the physician, has crafted a near-perfect murder weapon. It's untraceable by conventional means. It leaves no mark on the body other than a look of horror. It requires only a tiny amount and a simple heat source, and its origins are in a remote, exotic location which was a common trope in Victorian fiction, the idea of the dangers and strange secrets of the British Empire being brought back to haunt the civilized homeland. The name itself, the Devil's Foot, is wonderfully evocative. It suggests something that grows in a dark, unholy place. The foot shape of the root gives it a tangible, almost monstrous quality. It's not just a poison, it's a relic, a piece of some ancient malevolent entity. But the question we must now ask, as we leave the world of fiction and prepare to enter the world of fact, is this: does such a plant exist? Did Conan Doyle base his creation on a real botanical specimen, perhaps from a traveller's tale or a medical journal? Or was it purely a product of his magnificent imagination? Could there truly be a root in the vast, incredible pharmacy of the natural world that, when burned, releases a chemical that can hijack the human mind and scare it to death? A compound that doesn't poison the blood or stop the lungs, but simply shows the brain a vision of a terror so absolute that the body's own systems shut down in response. This is the mystery we will set out to solve. We have our literary specimen, carefully described and documented by Dr. Watson. Now we must become detectives ourselves. We will trade the foggy streets of London for the databases of ethnobotany, the files of toxicology, and the humid rainforests and arid plains where nature has spent millions of years perfecting its own chemical arsenal. The adventure of the Devil's Foot is over, but our search for the real Devil's Foot has just begun. Chapter 2: The European Suspects, Hellebores, Hemlock, and the ancient poisons of the old world. And so our search begins. It begins not in a mist-shrouded, unexplored jungle, nor on a desolate, wind-scoured plain, but in a place that might seem at first deceptively familiar. We begin our investigation in the gardens, the hedgerows, and the quiet, damp forests of old Europe. For it is here, in the ancient cradle of Western civilization, that humanity first learned to codify its relationship with the green world, a relationship built on sustenance, medicine, and a deep, abiding fear. Long before the synthesis of chemicals in a laboratory, the fields and woodlands were the world's first and only apothecary, and its most effective arsenal. And in the folklore, in the forgotten herbals and the whispers that cling to certain plants like the morning dew, we find names that echo the one we seek. Names that speak of devils, of wolves, of witches, and of a swift, silent death. We must start with the most tantalizing clues: the name itself. Devil's Foot. It is a name that suggests a sinister shape, a dark purpose, a plant deeply enmeshed in the folklore of fear. And in Europe there is a family of plants that has carried such dark associations for millennia. They are the Hellebores. Perhaps you know them by a gentler name, the Christmas rose or the Lenten rose. They are one of nature's quiet paradoxes, pushing their beautiful cup-shaped flowers up through the frozen soil and snow of late winter. They are a promise of spring in the dead of the year, with nodding heads of white, pink, green, or a deep bruised purple that looks almost black. Their leaves are tough, leathery, palmate like a hand with splayed fingers, or perhaps to a more superstitious mind, like a strange cloven footprint pressed into the foliage. They are ancient plants belonging to the buttercup family, Ranunculaceae, a clan notorious for its beautiful but often highly toxic members. To see a hellebore in a winter garden is to see a symbol of resilience. But to the ancients, this plant was anything but a gentle messenger of hope. The very name hellebore comes from the ancient Greek Helleboros. The meaning is debated, but one compelling translation is to injure food. It was a warning, written right into the lexicon, a label of poison understood across the Hellenic world. Hellebores are not just passively poisonous if eaten, they are steeped in a history of active, intentional harm. The Greek geographer Pausanias tells a story from the First Sacred War. Around 590 BC, the city of Kira was under siege, its position seemingly impregnable. The Athenian statesman Solon, leading the siege, had a cunning, ruthless idea. He found the source of the city's water supply, a small stream, and ordered his men to gather vast quantities of hellebore roots. They shredded them, steeped them in the water, and created a potent, invisible weapon. The stream, now laced with the plant's powerful chemicals, flowed into the city. Soon the defenders of Kurha were overcome with a violent, debilitating sickness, severe diarrhea and vomiting that left them too weak to man the walls. The besieging army walked into the city and took it with ease. It is one of the earliest recorded instances of chemical warfare in human history, carried out not with gas or synthetic agents, but with a simple winter-blooming flower. What was happening inside the bodies of those unfortunate soldiers? The hellebore was acting as a brilliant, malicious locksmith. The roots, leaves and seeds of the plant are rich in a variety of powerful compounds, most notably protoanemonin, a blistering skin irritant, and a suite of cardiac glycosides, including helleborin. That second name is the key. Cardiac glycosides. It's a class of chemicals that you might recognize from another famous European plant, the foxglove, which gives us the heart medication digitalis. These molecules are shaped, on a microscopic level, remarkably like the natural chemicals our bodies use to regulate the beating of our heart. They are, in essence, a perfectly forged false key. When you ingest them, they travel through the bloodstream and arrive at the muscle cells of the heart. There, they find a specific type of molecular lock on the cell's surface, a protein pump called the sodium-potassium pump. This pump is the tireless engine of the cell, maintaining the delicate electrical balance required for every single heartbeat. The cardiac glycoside, this false key from the hellebore, slides into the lock and jams it. Suddenly, the carefully maintained rhythm is thrown into chaos. The electrical gradient collapses. Calcium ions flood the heart cells, forcing them to contract with unnatural, violent force. The heart, the metronome of life, begins to beat erratically, its rhythm skipping and shuddering. The victim feels palpitations, a strange fluttering in the chest, as the organ that has reliably beat every second of their life begins to fail. With higher doses, this arrhythmia descends into fibrillation, a useless, quivering chaos, and then cardiac arrest, all from a plant that looks so gentle in the snow. But does this match the horror that befell the Tregennis family in Cornwall? Dr. Mortimer Tregennis described a scene not of heart failure, but of madness. He saw his siblings sitting around the table, laughing and shouting and singing, all of them with the devilment of a drove of monkeys. And then he saw the look on their faces change to one of terror, an inconceivable terror and madness. This psychological component, this intense mental distortion, doesn't align perfectly with the primary effects of hellebore. While any poisoning is terrifying, and the cardiac symptoms could induce panic, the specific joyous madness followed by abject fear points to a different kind of chemical assault. Hellebore attacks the heart's mechanics. The devil's foot, it seems, attacked the mind itself, and so we must thank the hellebore for its time. But for now, place it to one side in our list of suspects. Its folk name is a match. Its toxicity is unquestionable, but its method, its chemical signature, does not quite fit the evidence left at the scene. We must continue our search through the European portfolio of poisons, and this leads us, inevitably, back to ancient Greece, to the death of a philosopher, and to a far less conspicuous plant. Let us find a damp, shady place, perhaps near a riverbank or in a ditch at the edge of a field. Here we find a tall, stately plant, sometimes reaching 8 feet in height. It has a smooth, hollow stem, often mottled with purple or reddish spots, as if it has been bruised. Its leaves are delicate, feathery, and fern-like, and in the summer it produces broad, flat-topped clusters of tiny white flowers, like a spray of lace. It is an umbellifer, part of the same family as carrots, parsley, and parsnips. To an untrained eye, it is dangerously anonymous, easily mistaken for its edible cousins like Queen Anne's lace or wild chervil. But this is Conium maculatum. This is poison hemlock. There is no grandeur in its name, no overt reference to devils or demons. It is simply hemlock, and yet it is perhaps the most famous poison in all of Western history, forever linked to the execution of Socrates in 399 BC. Plato, in his dialogue Phaedo, gives us a calm, almost clinical account of his teacher's final moments. Sentenced to death by the Athenian state for impiety and corrupting the youth, Socrates was given a cup containing the juice of the hemlock plant. He drank it willingly, without trembling, and then, on the instructions of the executioner, began to walk around until his legs felt heavy. As his students wept, Socrates lay down, and the executioner began to examine him. He pinched Socrates' foot and asked if he could feel it. Socrates said no. He then pinched his leg, and again the answer was no. A coldness, a numbness, was creeping up his body from his feet and legs. Plato writes that the executioner told them that when this coldness reached the heart, he would be gone. All the while, Socrates' mind remained perfectly clear. He spoke with his friends, made a final request that they sacrifice a rooster to the god of medicine, and then he fell silent. The poison had reached its destination. The chemical agent responsible for this slow, methodical shutdown is an alkaloid called coniine. Unlike the cardiac glycosides of the hellebore, coniine is a neurotoxin. It does not target the heart muscle directly, but rather the communication system that controls all muscle movement, the nervous system. Imagine your nervous system as a vast, intricate telegraph network. Your brain is the central office, sending out messages, commands to move, to breathe, to blink. These messages travel along the telegraph wires, which are your nerves. At the very end of the line, where a nerve meets a muscle fiber, there is a tiny gap called the neuromuscular junction. For a message to cross this gap and make the muscle contract, the nerve ending releases a chemical messenger, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. This molecule drifts across the gap and plugs into a specific receptor on the muscle side, like a key fitting into a lock, completing the circuit and triggering the muscle to act. It is a system of breathtaking speed and precision, happening millions of times a day without a moment's thought from you. Coniine is a molecular saboteur. Its structure is similar enough to acetylcholine that it can also fit into that same receptor on the muscle. But instead of triggering a contraction and then leaving, it just stays there. It blocks the lock. It sits in the receptor and prevents the real messenger, acetylcholine, from getting through. The telegraph message is sent from the brain. It travels all the way down the wire, but it can never be delivered to its recipient. The muscle fiber waits for an order that never arrives. And this is why the paralysis caused by hemlock is so uniquely terrifying. It is an ascending paralysis. The longest nerves in the body are the ones that travel to the feet and legs. Coniine begins its work at these farthest outposts of the nervous system first. The victim feels a heaviness, then a numbness, in their toes, their feet, their calves. It is the telegraph lines going dead, one by one from the outside in. The muscles of the limbs fall silent, then the muscles of the torso. The victim can no longer move, can no longer sit up. But the brain, the central telegraph office, is completely unaffected. The mind remains lucid, aware, trapped inside a body that is slowly, systematically being turned to stone. The final act of hemlock poisoning is the paralysis of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, the muscles that power the lungs. The brain sends the frantic primal command to breathe, but the message finds only blocked receptors and silent muscle fibers. The victim suffocates, fully conscious of what is happening until the very end. Now we must compare this to the scene in Cornwall. Was there paralysis? No. Watson's account is of the opposite. Frenzied action, laughing, shouting, singing. Did the victims have a clear mind? Again, the opposite. They were in the grip of a profound madness. The methodical, quiet, and mentally lucid death caused by hemlock is a world away from the chaotic terror of the devil's foot. Hemlock silences the body while leaving the mind a clear-eyed prisoner. The devil's foot, it seems, set the mind on fire and made the body its puppet. Once more, we must set a famous suspect aside. Hemlock is a potent and historically significant poison, a master of silent assassination, but it is not the culprit we seek. Our investigation must go deeper into the darker corners of the European woods to find the plants whose reputations were not made in the execution chambers of philosophers, but in the whispered folklore of witchcraft and lycanthropy. Let us travel now to a mountainous region in the dappled shade of a woodland grove. Here, growing in the rich, damp soil, we find a truly majestic plant. It stands tall, sometimes taller than a person, with large dark green leaves that are deeply lobed, again, like a splayed hand. But it is the flowers that are most arresting. They do not have open, inviting petals like a rose or a lily. Instead, they are shaped into a deep helmet-like structure, a hood that gives the plant one of its common names, monkshood. They are a brilliant, almost electric shade of violet blue, a splash of intense color in the forest green. This is Aconitum napellus, known more commonly, and more ominously, as wolfsbane. Of all the plants we have met so far, wolfsbane is perhaps the one most steeped in pure, unadulterated menace. Its history is not one of subtle statecraft or philosophical debate. It is a story of brute force. The name wolfsbane is brutally literal. For centuries, shepherds and hunters would leave out meat baits laced with the plant's powdered root to kill wolves that preyed on their flocks. Its other name, aconite, is said to derive from the Greek word for dart or javelin, because its potent juice was used to envenom arrowheads and spear tips for both hunting and warfare. The ancient Gauls and the people of India and Nepal all used it in this way. It was not a poison of stealth, but a poison of shock and awe. The agent behind this power has a name that sounds as sharp as its effects, aconitine. It is one of the most powerful and fast-acting plant toxins known to science. A few milligrams of the pure alkaloid can be fatal. If Hellebore is a heart-focused assassin, and Hemlock is a systematic paralytic, then aconite is a pure agent of chaos, attacking both the nervous system and the heart with ferocious, overwhelming speed. Its mechanism is the polar opposite of Hemlock's. Where conitine blocks nerve signals, aconitine throws the floodgates open. It targets a different set of locks on the surface of nerve and muscle cells, the voltage-gated sodium channels. These channels are the gatekeepers of nerve impulses. They remain closed until an electrical signal arrives, at which point they snap open for a fraction of a millisecond, allowing a rush of sodium ions into the cell. This rush is the nerve signal, the spark that travels down the wire. Once the signal has passed, the gates snap shut again, ready for the next one. This opening and closing is the fundamental language of the nervous system, the binary code of biology. Aconitine binds to these sodium channels and forces them to stay open. The gates are jammed, not shut, but wide open. Sodium ions pour into the cells continuously, without a signal. The nerves can no longer reset. They begin to fire randomly, erratically, uncontrollably. The entire telegraph network descends into a storm of meaningless static. The symptoms of aconite poisoning are a direct result of this systemic electrical breakdown. The first sign is often a tingling, burning, and then numbing sensation in the mouth, lips, and throat as the sensory nerves there begin to misfire. This quickly spreads to the fingertips and the rest of the body. Victims report a bizarre and deeply distressing combination of sensations, a feeling of intense burning heat and freezing cold at the same time. Their skin might feel as if insects are crawling all over it. This is the sensory nervous system screaming in confusion. Then, the motor nerves are affected. Muscle weakness, spasms and convulsions can occur as the commands from the brain are lost in the electrical noise. The digestive system revolts with violent nausea and vomiting. But the most deadly arena of chaos is the heart. Just like the skeletal muscles, the heart muscle is controlled by these same sodium channels. Aconitine throws the heart's own intricate conduction system into disarray. The heartbeat becomes wildly irregular. Tachycardia, a racing, frantic pulse, might be followed by bradycardia, a dangerously slow one. This often culminates in ventricular fibrillation, the same chaotic quivering we saw with Hellebore, leading to cardiac arrest and death, often within a few hours. It is a death of profound physical torment. But does it align with the devil's foot? The psychological component is still not the primary feature. While the experience would undoubtedly cause extreme fear and panic, aconitine is not a hallucinogen. It does not typically create the kind of complex, delirious madness reported by Mortimer Tregennis. It is a poison that attacks the body's wiring, not the seat of consciousness itself. The terror it induces is a rational response to an excruciating physical ordeal. The terror of the devil's foot seems to have been of a more supernatural, reality-bending kind, a terror born from a mind that has been fundamentally broken. And so, with a respectful nod to the fearsome power of the Queen of Poisons, we must continue our search. We have examined plants that attack the heart and plants that attack the body's nerves, but the evidence from Poldhu Bay points us toward a plant that attacks the very fabric of perception. This leads us to our final and most compelling European suspect, a plant with a name that is a perfect chilling blend of mythology and vanity, a plant called Atropa belladonna, deadly nightshade. We find it growing in disturbed soil, in scrubland, or in the shadowy parts of a forest. It is a perennial shrub, growing to about 5 feet tall, with dull green leaves and a branching herbaceous stem. The flowers are not showy, they are a dusky, bell-shaped purple, tinged with green, hanging down with a quiet, almost secretive demeanor. It is the fruit that catches the eye. The plant produces berries that are at first green, but ripen into a glossy, luscious black, about the size of a small cherry. They look sweet, juicy, and inviting, a perfect fatal deception for a foraging animal or an unwary child. The plant's scientific name is a story in itself. Atropa comes from Atropos, one of the 3 fates in Greek mythology. While her sisters Clotho spun the thread of life and Lachesis measured it, it was Atropos, the unturning, who held the shears and cut the thread, ending a mortal's life. The name bestows upon the plant the power of inexorable, inescapable death. But the second part of the name, belladonna, is Italian for beautiful lady. This seemingly contradictory name comes from a historical cosmetic use. For centuries, women would use drops of an infusion made from the nightshade plant in their eyes. The chemicals in the plant would cause the pupils to dilate dramatically, creating a wide-eyed, dark, and supposedly alluring gaze that was considered fashionable. So here we have a plant named for both the mythical embodiment of death and the fleeting vanity of human beauty. It is the perfect encapsulation of its nature, a seductive appearance masking a deadly secret. The secrets of deadly nightshade are 2 potent tropane alkaloids, atropine and scopolamine. These are not cardiotoxins or nerve-blocking agents in the same way as the poisons we have previously examined. These are anticholinergics. They operate on a different part of the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, which controls many of our involuntary bodily functions, the so-called rest and digest system. And most importantly for our investigation, they are able to cross the blood-brain barrier and wreak havoc directly within the central nervous system, within the brain itself. Their mechanism is, once again, a story of molecular mimicry. They target the same neurotransmitter that Hemlock does, acetylcholine. But they don't block it at the muscle junction. They block a different type of acetylcholine receptor, the muscarinic receptors, which are found all over the body in the heart, the lungs, the digestive tract, the sweat glands, and crucially, throughout the brain. Acetylcholine in the brain is vital for memory, learning, attention, and the processing of sensory information. It is one of the key chemicals that helps us build our stable, coherent model of reality. Atropine and scopolamine are shaped perfectly to fit into these receptors and block them. They are like putting glue in all the most important keyholes of the brain's internal communication network. The effect is a complete and catastrophic breakdown of both bodily function and mental clarity. The physical symptoms of nightshade poisoning are so consistent they are taught to medical students with a famous mnemonic: blind as a bat, mad as a hatter, red as a beet, hot as a hare, dry as a bone. Blind as a bat. The pupils become so dilated they can no longer focus, causing blurred vision and an extreme sensitivity to light. Red as a beet. The chemicals cause the blood vessels in the skin to dilate, leading to a pronounced flushing of the face and neck. Hot as a hare. By blocking the sweat glands, the body loses its primary way of cooling itself, leading to a dangerously high fever or hypothermia. Dry as a bone. Saliva and mucus production ceases, leading to an intensely dry mouth and throat, making it difficult to speak or swallow. But it is the final part of the mnemonic, mad as a hatter, that brings us closer to the devil's foot than ever before. The blocking of acetylcholine in the brain induces a state known as anticholinergic delirium. This is not just confusion, it is a profound and terrifying disconnection from reality. The brain's ability to interpret sensory input is shattered. The victim begins to hallucinate. But these are not the psychedelic geometric patterns of other substances. These are vivid, realistic, and often deeply disturbing visions. People may see insects crawling on the walls, have conversations with people who are not there, or fail to recognize their own family members. Their thoughts become jumbled and nonsensical. Memory is impaired, and they may be caught in strange, repetitive loops of behavior, like plucking at their clothes or trying to perform tasks that make no sense. This delirium is almost always accompanied by agitation, fear, and paranoia. The world has ceased to follow any recognizable rules. The victim is trapped in a waking nightmare, a dream from which they cannot escape. Does this sound familiar? Laughing and shouting and singing, all of them, reported Mortimer Tregennis. This could be the initial euphoric, disinhibited stage of the delirium. And what followed? An inconceivable terror and madness. This is a near-perfect description of the terrifying paranoid phase of an anticholinergic crisis. The victims were not paralyzed. They were not in clear-minded physical agony. They were, for all intents and purposes, completely insane. Their minds had been chemically unbound from reality. Of all our European suspects, deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna, is by far the strongest candidate. Its chemical signature, the unique and terrifying delirium it produces, aligns almost perfectly with the psychological symptoms described by Dr. Watson. Hellebore attacks the heart. Hemlock attacks the nerves of the body. Wolfsbane attacks both with overwhelming physical force, but nightshade attacks the mind. It is a poison of perception, a chemical that dissolves the boundary between the real and the unreal. We have found a plant whose effects match the story. But one crucial piece of the puzzle still doesn't fit: the method of administration. The devil's foot root was not eaten as a berry or drunk as an infusion. It was a reddish-brown powder, a pervading and poisonous substance that was thrown onto a fire. Its effects were delivered through the air. Sterndale, the great explorer, said, "The vapor thrown off by the burning root is so powerful that anyone who breathes it must die." Can our prime suspect, deadly nightshade, be weaponized in this way? The alkaloids atropine and scopolamine can be vaporized and inhaled, but it is not their most common or efficient route of administration. Burning the root would likely destroy a significant portion of the active chemicals. While it's not entirely impossible that a sufficiently large quantity of a highly concentrated powder could produce a toxic smoke, it doesn't feel elegant. It doesn't feel like the perfect fit we are looking for. The method described in the story, a powder that combusts to release a deadly, mind-altering vapor, is specific and unusual. So we have a suspect, a very strong one, but we have a problem with the delivery method. Our investigation in Europe has brought us tantalizingly close. We have walked through the ancient poison gardens of the Old World. We have seen the chemicals that silenced Socrates, the cardiac poisons used in ancient warfare, the neurotoxins that gave birth to legends of werewolves, and the deliriants that fueled the visions of witches. We have found a plant, deadly nightshade, that can produce a madness identical to the one that claimed the Tregennis family. Yet, the mystery is not fully solved. The specific properties of the devil's foot root, a dried, powdered root that works by combustion, still elude us. Perhaps we have been searching in the right category of toxin, a powerful hallucinogen, but in the wrong part of the world. Europe's poisons are potent, but they are stories of ingestion, of envenomed arrow tips, of tainted water supplies. Sterndale, the man who brought the root to England, was a lion hunter and explorer, a man who had spent his life in the wilds of Africa. He called the substance the Ordeal poison of the Ubangis, a tribe from a remote and poorly understood region. It seems our journey as botanical detectives must now follow in Sterndale's footsteps. We must leave the familiar fields and forests of Europe behind. The clues are pointing us southward, to a continent with a vaster, more ancient and far more complex pharmacopoeia. Our search for the real devil's foot must now take us into the heart of Africa. Chapter 3. The African Connection, Colonial Botany and the Ordeal Poisons of the Empire. And so we arrive, not by steamship, not with the hum of an engine and the bitter taste of quinine on our tongues, but in the quiet vessel of our imagination. We drift south, carried on the currents of a story, following the faint 100-year-old trail left by explorers and botanists. Our journey takes us away from the clipped hedges and familiar gardens of England, across the vast shimmering expanse of the Atlantic, to the coastline of West Africa. The air here, even in our minds, feels different. It's heavy, thick with humidity, and carries the scent of damp earth, of a million decaying leaves, of wood smoke, and the distant briny tang of the mangrove swamps. This is the world that Leon Sterndale, the fictional lion hunter, would have known. And it is here, in the historical record of this immense and ancient land, that we must search for the true identity of a plant capable of the strange horrors described by Sherlock Holmes. Before we even begin to look for a specific leaf or root, we must first understand the way in which the European mind of the 19th century approached a place like this. They did not, for the most part, arrive as students seeking to learn, but as collectors. They were collectors of specimens, of resources, of souls, and of knowledge. But the knowledge they sought was of a very particular kind. It was a knowledge of classification, of categorization. When a Victorian botanist, sweating in his thick wool coat, hacking his way through the undergrowth, came across a new plant, his first instinct was not necessarily to ask the local people, "What is the story of this life? What is its spirit? What is its place in your world?" His first instinct was to press it, dry it, and give it a Latin name. He was, in a sense, taking a single profound word from a language he did not understand and transcribing it into his own alphabet, capturing its form but losing almost all of its meaning. This massive project of colonial botany created vast archives of dried, silent plants in the museums and herbariums of London, Paris, and Berlin. But it was a profoundly incomplete library. It was like owning thousands of musical instruments, each carefully labeled and polished, without having any record of the music they were meant to play. The music, the living knowledge of these plants, resided with the people who had lived alongside them for millennia. This is the world of ethnobotany, the deep, intricate, and ancient understanding of how a plant is woven into the fabric of a culture, as food, as medicine, as building material, and most pertinent to our search, as a spiritual tool, a key to the unseen world, and an arbiter of justice. The phrase that Sterndale used in the story, "Ordeal poison," is our first and most important clue. To the European mind of the time, this phrase conjured images of superstition, of arbitrary and savage justice meted out by a witch doctor. The reality, as is so often the case, was infinitely more complex and in its own way far more structured. The trial by ordeal was not an act of chaos. It was the very heart of the judicial system for many cultures, particularly in the regions of the Niger Delta and the Cross River, in what is now Nigeria. Imagine a society without a centralized police force, without prisons, without the vast and sprawling legal system we rely on today. How do you determine guilt or innocence? How do you restore balance to a community when a serious crime like theft or murder has been committed? For many, the answer was to turn the judgment over to a higher power. The ordeal was a ritual designed to do just that. It was not the poison, in their view, that killed the guilty. The poison was merely a vessel, a sacred medium through which the gods or the ancestors could make their judgment known. The plant was a question, asked of the universe, and the body of the accused was the answer. To be subjected to the ordeal was to stand before your community, and in the most direct and terrifying way imaginable, allow the spirit world to look inside your heart. If you were innocent, the belief went, the spirits would protect you. The poison would be rendered harmless, it would pass through you, or be expelled. If you were guilty, the spirits would withdraw their protection, and the poison would be allowed to do its work, revealing your transgression to the entire community. It was a lie detector, a jury, and a divine sacrament, all contained within the unassuming shell of a seed or the fibrous pith of a root. And it is here, along the banks of the Cross River, that we find a plant that fits our description so perfectly, so chillingly, that it must be considered the prime suspect in our botanical investigation. It is not a root, as in the story, but a bean, the seed of a leguminous vine. The plant is Physostigma venenosum. To the Efik people who lived and traded along this river, the seed was known as Essere. To the British traders and missionaries who first encountered its power, it became known by a more direct and evocative name, the Calabar bean. Let us try to picture the scene. The air is so humid it feels like a weight on your skin. The light is a dappled, shifting green, filtered through the immense canopy of the rainforest. A tangled woody vine, a liana, climbs high into the trees. Its leaves are soft, dark green. Hanging from this vine are long, dark brown pods, similar to a runner bean, but thicker, tougher. Inside these pods, nestled in a soft, woolly lining, are the beans. They are beautiful, in a sinister way. They're about the size of a large coffee bean, kidney-shaped, with a hard, polished shell that ranges from a deep chocolate brown to almost black. Along the curved edge runs a distinctive groove, a scar where it was once attached to the pod. This is the Esser bean. It looks harmless, inert. It has no foul smell, no thorns, no warning colours. It is a quiet, unassuming seed. Yet within its dense, starchy interior, it holds one of the most potent and precisely acting neurotoxins ever discovered. The use of the Calabar bean was controlled by powerful secret societies, most famously the Ekpe, or Leopard Society. These societies were the true government of the region. They regulated trade, enforced social norms, and when necessary, administered justice. When a crime was committed for which there was no clear evidence or confession, the Ekpe might decree a trial by Essere. The ritual was a solemn public affair. The entire community would gather. The accused would be brought forward. The beans would be ground into a powder and mixed with water to create a milky, bitter emulsion. The accused would then drink the potion. What happened next was a matter of life and death, watched with breathless anticipation by every man, woman, and child. The poison works with terrifying speed. Within minutes, the first symptoms appear. A feeling of weakness, of dizziness. The world might begin to swim. Then comes a profusion of saliva filling the mouth, followed by intense nausea and stomach cramps. The muscles begin to twitch and tremble uncontrollably. A great weight seems to settle on the chest, making each breath a conscious, desperate effort. The final stages involve a complete paralysis, and death comes from asphyxiation, as the muscles of the diaphragm and ribcage simply cease to obey the commands of the brain. The mind, it was often reported, remained terrifyingly clear until the very end. But there was a path to survival. The key was in the nausea. If the accused could vomit violently and immediately and expel the entire dose of the poison, the symptoms would subside and they would live. This was taken as the sign of innocence. The gods had rejected the poison. The community would erupt in celebration, carrying the vindicated individual on their shoulders, their name cleared in the most dramatic way possible. Failure to vomit meant a slow, agonizing death, and a confirmation of guilt for all to see. For decades, the European observers who wrote about this practice in their journals and letters home dismissed it as a game of chance, a random, savage lottery. They failed to grasp the intricate pharmacology and psychology at play. The Efik, through generations of observation, understood the bean's power in ways the Europeans did not. They knew the dosage mattered. They knew the speed of ingestion was critical, and they may have understood, on some level, the role that fear itself played in the outcome. Think of it. A person who knows they are truly innocent might approach the ordeal with a certain calm, a faith in their own vindication. They might drink the potion quickly, in a single gulp, triggering a more rapid and powerful emetic response, the body's natural defense against poison. A person consumed by the terror and anxiety of their own guilt, however, might hesitate, sipping the bitter liquid slowly. This allows more of the toxin to be absorbed into the bloodstream before the nausea can take hold. Their own fear would, in a very real sense, seal their fate. The ordeal was not just a test of the body, it was a test of the spirit. To understand how a simple being can hold such power, we must shrink down, far beyond the world visible to our eyes. We must travel into the microscopic realm of our own nervous system. Imagine your nervous system as a vast and intricate communications network, a series of biological wires, your nerves that carry messages from your brain to every part of your body. These messages tell your heart to beat, your lungs to breathe, and your muscles to contract. But these wires are not continuous. Between the end of one nerve and the beginning of the next, or between a nerve and a muscle cell, there is a tiny, infinitesimal gap. This space is called a synapse. It is a chemical bridge. For a message to cross this gap, the first nerve releases a tiny puff of a chemical messenger, a neurotransmitter. This molecule drifts across the synapse, locks into a receptor on the other side, like a key into a lock, and delivers the message. For all the muscles that control our voluntary movements, and many that control our involuntary ones, the primary messenger molecule is called acetylcholine. It is the chemical that says contract, work, fire. Now, for any communication system to work, you need not only a way to send a message, but a way to end it. If acetylcholine were released and just stayed in the synapse, the muscle would be told to contract, and it would never be told to stop. It would be locked in a permanent, rigid spasm. So, nature has devised an elegant solution. Residing in the synapse is an enzyme, a molecular machine, whose sole job is to clean up. This enzyme is called acetylcholinesterase. As soon as acetylcholine delivers its message, this enzyme swoops in and deactivates it, breaking it down, clearing the synapse so it's ready for the next signal. It's the ultimate cleanup crew, ensuring every message is brief, precise, and clear. The Calabar bean performs a stunning act of chemical sabotage. The active compound within it, an alkaloid named physostigmine, is a molecule shaped so perfectly that it fits into the active site of the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. It gums up the works. It is like putting the wrong key into a lock and having it break off, jamming the mechanism completely. Physostigmine is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. It shuts down the cleanup crew. The result is a chemical storm. With the cleanup crew out of action, the acetylcholine that is released into the synapse has nowhere to go. It builds up and up and up. It bombards the receptors on the other side, sending a relentless, unending signal. A single nerve impulse from the brain, which should have resulted in a single controlled muscle twitch, now results in a chaotic, uncontrolled and sustained contraction. This is what causes the muscle tremors, the spasms, the convulsions. Every gland goes into overdrive, which is why the victim salivates and sweats profusely. The smooth muscles of the digestive tract and bladder contract violently, and most fatally, the diaphragm, the great sheet of muscle that powers our breathing, becomes paralyzed in a state of permanent contraction, unable to relax and allow another breath. The victim is locked within their own body, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the quiet, orderly conversation between their nerves and muscles descends into a deafening, chaotic roar. It is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. The plant, Physostigma venenosum, evolved this complex molecule for a simple reason: to defend itself from being eaten by insects and herbivores. It devised a key that could unlock and disrupt the most fundamental machinery of animal life. It is a silent chemical scream that says, "Do not touch." When British missionaries and physicians began to study the Calabar bean in the mid-19th century, they saw it not as a tool of justice, but as a fascinating chemical puzzle. They sent samples back to Europe. In Scotland, the pioneering toxicologist Sir Robert Christison famously experimented on himself, taking a small portion of a bean and meticulously documenting the terrifying symptoms before he managed to induce vomiting with a gulp of shaving water. He barely survived. Another physician, a Scottish ophthalmologist named Douglas Argyll Robertson, made a breakthrough discovery. He noticed that applying an extract of the bean to the eye caused the pupil to constrict dramatically. At the time, this was a revelation. It provided the first effective treatment for glaucoma, a painful and blinding condition caused by a buildup of pressure inside the eye. Constricting the pupil helped to open up the drainage channels within the eye, relieving the pressure. A substance used as an Ordeal poison on the Cross River was now being used in the hospitals of Edinburgh and London to save people's sight. The journey of discovery continued. The isolated compound, physostigmine, became an essential tool for scientists trying to understand the very nature of the synapse. It allowed them to prove the theory of chemical neurotransmission, a cornerstone of modern neuroscience. The study of how this plant-derived poison worked led directly to the development of a whole class of modern drugs called anticholinesterases, which are still used today to treat conditions like myasthenia gravis, a debilitating autoimmune disease that causes muscle weakness. They are even used to reverse the effects of certain paralytic agents used during surgery. And here lies the profound and perhaps unsettling heart of this part of our story. The Efik people knew of the Calabar bean's power for centuries, perhaps millennia. Their knowledge was deep, practical, and woven into the very fabric of their cosmology and their system of justice. It was a holistic knowledge, encompassing the physical, the spiritual, and the social. The colonial botanists and chemists who followed arrived and saw only a chemical. They extracted the physostigmine from the bean in the same way they extracted rubber from the trees and palm oil from the nuts. They took the active ingredient, but they left the story, the culture, and the context behind. They rebranded a sacred object of Efik jurisprudence as a Western medical breakthrough, often with little or no credit given to the indigenous knowledge that had pointed the way. The story of the Calabar bean is a perfect allegory for the colonial encounter with the natural world. It is a tale of profound misunderstanding, of the clash between different ways of knowing. The European narrative framed the ordeal as primitive superstition, while simultaneously mining that very same superstition for valuable chemical compounds that would form the basis of new scientific paradigms and pharmaceutical fortunes. It reveals a mindset that could see the intricate molecular engineering of the physostigmine molecule as a marvel of nature, but could not see the intricate social engineering of the ordeal ritual as anything other than barbarism. So when Arthur Conan Doyle, writing at the height of the British Empire, has his character Dr. Sterndale talk of a mysterious devil's foot root from the wilds of Africa, an ordeal poison of the Ubangis, he is not just inventing a fictional plot device. He is tapping into a very real and powerful current in the Victorian imagination. He is channeling a century of true stories, of half-understood reports from explorers, missionaries, and colonial administrators about the astonishing and terrifying power hidden in the plants of Africa. The Heart of Darkness narrative was not just about geography, it was about botany. It was a fear and a fascination with a natural world that did not obey European rules, a world that held secrets of life and death that their own science was only just beginning to comprehend. The fictional devil's foot, which caused madness and terror before death, does not perfectly match the effects of the Calabar bean, which causes paralysis with a clear mind. Our search is not yet over. But in the story of Physostigma venenosum, we have found a crucial piece of the puzzle. We have found a real ordeal poison, steeped in ritual, with a terrifying and potent effect on the human nervous system. and we have discovered the historical pathway by which the knowledge of such a plant could travel from the humid rainforests of the Cross River to the foggy streets of London, transforming from a sacred tool of justice into a medical marvel, and finally into the kind of thrilling, exotic mystery that would find its way into the notebooks of a consulting detective at 221B Baker Street. The trail has led us here, to the intersection of botany, chemistry, and history, and now we must see where it leads us next, as we continue to peel back the layers of this strange and fascinating tale. For now, just rest. Let the rhythmic descriptions of these distant lands and ancient practices guide you deeper into sleep. Let the complexities of neurochemistry become a soothing, intricate pattern, a lullaby of molecules and synapses as you drift and dream. Chapter 4. The Pharmacological Nightmare. A chemical deep dive into neurotoxins. And so you drift and dream. In that space between waking and sleeping, the mind floats free, and the lullaby of molecules and synapses we spoke of becomes the very air you breathe. The intricate dance of chemistry that weaves the tapestry of your consciousness continues its quiet, unseen work. It is a world of keys and locks, of messengers and receivers, all operating in a harmony so profound, so practiced, it feels effortless, it feels like you. But what if another key were to find its way into this delicate machinery? A key not born of your own body, but forged in the green heart of a silent plant. A key shaped by millions of years of evolution, not to build, but to dismantle, not to communicate, but to sow confusion. This is where our journey must go now, deeper into that molecular world. We are going to gently take these nightmare chemicals into our hands and examine them, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of awe. For to understand how a system can be broken is to truly appreciate the miracle of how it works in the first place. Let us begin with the stage upon which this drama unfolds, the single nerve cell, the neuron. Picture it in your mind's eye. It is not a simple blob, but a thing of exquisite and specific design. There is a central body, the soma, the cell's command center, holding the precious library of DNA. And from this center, branching out like the limbs of a winter tree, are the dendrites. These are the listeners, the receivers, their surfaces covered in thousands of tiny ports, waiting for a message. And then, there is the axon, a single, impossibly long and slender fiber that extends away from the cell body. It is the voice of the neuron, a living wire, thinner than a human hair, yet capable of stretching for meters in some animals. It is wrapped in a fatty sheath, a substance called myelin, which acts as a perfect insulator. It's like the rubber coating on an electrical cord, ensuring that the message, the electrical impulse traveling down its length, does not fade or falter. It ensures the whisper of a thought that begins in your brain arrives, with perfect fidelity, at the tip of your finger. This message, this whisper, is called an action potential. It is a wave of electricity, a beautiful self-perpetuating cascade of chemistry. The membrane of the axon is studded with tiny molecular gates ion channels. In its resting state, the neuron painstakingly pumps ions, charged particles, to create a difference in electrical charge between the inside and the outside of the cell. It creates a tension, a stillness pregnant with possibility, like a drawn bowstring. And when the neuron decides to fire, it is a magnificent, coordinated event. The gates at the beginning of the axon snap open. Positively charged sodium ions rush into the cell, erasing the negative charge and creating a flash of positive energy. This flash triggers the next set of gates down the line to open, and then the next, and the next. A wave of electrical change travels down the axon's length, a spark running down a fuse, at speeds of over 100 meters per second. It is the speed of thought, the speed of sensation. But here is the most crucial part of our story. The neuron does not physically touch the next neuron in the chain. At the very end of the axon's long journey, there is a gap, a chasm, infinitesimally small, yet functionally immense. This is the synapse, the synaptic cleft. It is a space of pure potential, a silent microscopic harbour where one ship must pass its cargo to the next without ever touching the dock. When our electrical wave, our action potential, reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of something else entirely. Not electricity, but chemicals. Tiny molecular messengers called neurotransmitters. They are stored in minuscule sacs, vesicles, like precious cargo in the hold of a ship. On arrival of the electrical signal, these sacs merge with the cell membrane and release their contents into the synaptic gap. Imagine it. Thousands of these purpose-built molecules are suddenly released, flooding this tiny space, tumbling through the fluid between the cells, and on the other side, on the dendrite of the listening neuron, are the receivers, the locks for which these neurotransmitters are the keys. These are receptor proteins, molecules of breathtaking complexity, each one folded into a unique shape, a shape that will only accept one specific type of neurotransmitter. When the neurotransmitter key drifts across the synapse and finds its matching receptor lock, it slots in perfectly. This binding action is what opens the ion gates on the next neuron, beginning the whole electrical process anew. The message is passed. The thought continues. The muscle receives its command to twitch. The memory is formed. It is a chain of whispers, passed from cell to cell, across these tiny, silent gaps. The body uses many different neurotransmitters, a whole vocabulary of chemical words. There is dopamine, the molecule of reward and motivation, serotonin, the regulator of mood, and for our story, one of the most important, one of the oldest and most fundamental, is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the workhorse of the nervous system. It is the key that unlocks the door between nerve and muscle, allowing your brain to command your body. It is the key that slows your heart to a resting rhythm. It is the key that constricts your pupils in bright light. And within the brain, it is a master regulator of learning, of memory, of attention, of the very boundary between the real and the imagined. The entire system is one of elegant precision and, just as importantly, of elegant cleanup. After acetylcholine has delivered its message, an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase arrives on the scene. It is a molecular custodian of unbelievable efficiency. It finds the acetylcholine molecules and in a fraction of a second breaks them apart, deactivating them. The key is removed from the lock and the lock is reset, ready for the next signal. The whisper ends, leaving silence, ready for the next whisper. This is the stage. This perfectly balanced, exquisitely timed ballet of electricity and chemistry. It is the foundation of your every thought, your every breath, your every heartbeat. Now, let us introduce a new player, a molecule from a different world. Let us begin our exploration with a family of plants as famous in folklore and history as they are in toxicology, the nightshades, the Solanaceae family, a lineage that includes the humble potato and tomato, but also their much darker cousins, Atropa belladonna, or deadly nightshade, Datura stramonium, the devil's snare, and Hyoscyamus niger, or henbane. These plants are master chemists. Over eons of being browsed upon by animals, they have perfected a form of self-defense that is not physical, but psychological. They have learned to forge their own keys to the animal nervous system. These keys are known as tropane alkaloids, and two of the most potent are named atropine and scopolamine. If you were to look at a molecule of atropine, you would see it shares a certain structural resemblance to our workhorse neurotransmitter, acetylcholine. It has a shape that is just similar enough to fit into the same lock, but it is not the same. It is a counterfeit key. When a person ingests a part of the deadly nightshade plant, these atropine molecules are absorbed into the bloodstream and begin their journey through the body. They travel everywhere, and eventually they arrive at the synapses, those tiny, crucial gaps between our nerve cells. And there, in that microscopic harbour, they drift across and find the acetylcholine receptors, and they fit. The atropine molecule slides into the receptor, the lock designed for acetylcholine. But it does not open it. It does not transmit a signal. It is the wrong shape to turn the tumblers. It simply sits there, occupying the space. It is a key that has been broken off in the lock. And now the real messenger, acetylcholine, arrives, carrying its vital instructions. But it can do nothing. The lock is blocked. The message cannot be delivered. The molecular custodian, acetylcholinesterase, arrives to clean up, but it cannot break down the atropine. The counterfeit key remains, jamming the works. This is what pharmacologists call competitive antagonism. The signal is not distorted, it is simply silenced, and the effects of this silence begin to spread through the body as system after system finds its instructions are no longer getting through. Let's trace the effects. Acetylcholine is responsible for telling the muscles in your iris to constrict in the light. When atropine blocks those receptors, the command never arrives. The muscles that open the pupil, which are controlled by a different system, are now unopposed, and so the pupil dilates, wide and dark, letting in a flood of unfocused light, blurring the world into a dreamlike haze. The very name belladonna, meaning beautiful lady in Italian, comes from the historic practice of women using extracts of the plant as eye drops to achieve this wide-eyed, supposedly alluring look, a cosmetic effect brought about by a profound neurological blockade. Acetylcholine tells the salivary glands to produce saliva and the sweat glands to produce sweat. Block the signal, and a strange consuming dryness takes over. The mouth feels like cotton. The skin becomes hot, flushed, and unnervingly dry. The body's natural cooling system has been turned off. In the chest, the heart, the vagus nerve, a primary channel of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, uses acetylcholine to put a gentle brake on the heart, keeping its rhythm slow and steady. When atropine blocks this signal, it is like cutting the brake lines. The heart, freed from its restraint, begins to race, pounding in the chest, a condition known as tachycardia. But it is in the brain, the central nervous system, that the true nightmare described by Sherlock's client unfolds. Acetylcholine is a critical conductor in the orchestra of the mind. It helps to weave together sensory input, memory, and focus to create the coherent reality we inhabit. It is the steady hand that guides the needle of consciousness on the vinyl record of the world. When scopolamine and atropine cross the blood-brain barrier and begin to jam the acetylcholine receptors in the brain, that steady hand is lost. The music of reality becomes distorted, disjointed, short-term memory fails, the ability to concentrate dissolves, the line between what is real and what is a dream begins to fray, and then to break entirely. The mind, deprived of its anchor, enters a state of profound delirium. Hallucinations begin, but they are not the vibrant geometric patterns of some other substances. They are often described as mundane, confusing, and terrifyingly real. A person might have a long, detailed conversation with someone who is not there. They may try to pick up objects that do not exist, or brush away insects that are not crawling on their skin. There is a deep and disorienting confusion, an inability to recognize familiar places or faces. This is the madness of the devil's foot root. It is not an invention of a creative mind. It is a meticulously detailed chemical sabotage of the machinery of consciousness itself. The plant, in its silent green wisdom, has learned to dismantle a mind from the inside out, turning the victim's own perception into a weapon against them. And it does all of this with a molecule so small, so simple by biological standards, yet so perfectly shaped to fit a lock. It was never meant to open. It is a testament to the power of molecular mimicry, of evolution's endless, patient tinkering, finding the weaknesses in the armor of even the most complex creatures. To rest here for a moment, and just contemplate that, a silent flower, holding within its petals and leaves a key that can unlock the gates of reason and let the dream world flood in, is to feel a deep and humbling respect for the quiet power of the botanical world. But this is only one way to break the system. Nature, in its boundless and sometimes brutal creativity, has explored countless other avenues. The tropane alkaloids silence a signal by blocking the receiver. Other plant toxins have learned to shout so loudly that the system overloads and collapses. Let us move our focus now, from the tangled woods of Europe where the nightshade grows, to the marshes and riverbanks where another infamous plant resides, Conium maculatum, poison hemlock. This is a plant of an entirely different character. It is an unassuming member of the carrot family, with delicate fern-like leaves and clusters of small white flowers. It looks innocent, almost fragile, yet it was the instrument of death for the philosopher Socrates in ancient Athens. Its weapon is an alkaloid called coniine. Structurally, it is much simpler than atropine. It is a small, nimble molecule, and it targets a different subtype of acetylcholine receptor, the nicotinic receptors, which are most concentrated at the neuromuscular junction, the very synapse where your nerves speak to your muscles. Coniine, like atropine, is a mimic. It resembles acetylcholine enough to fit into the nicotinic receptor, but its effect is violently different. It is not a silent blocker, it is a powerful activator. When coniine locks into the receptor, it triggers it, just as acetylcholine would. The ion channels open, the muscle cell fires. The problem is coniine does not let go. Remember our efficient custodian, acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme that cleans up acetylcholine? It has no effect on coniine. The foreign key is stuck in the lock, and the lock is stuck in the on position. The muscle cell is subjected to a constant, unrelenting signal to fire. After an initial period of stimulation, of tremors and spasms, the receptor enters a state of what is called depolarization blockade. It becomes desensitized. It is like shouting into someone's ear until they go deaf. The receptor, overwhelmed by the continuous signal, simply shuts down. It will no longer respond to anything, not to the coniine, and not to the body's own acetylcholine. The result is paralysis. And it is a particularly cruel and insidious form of paralysis. It typically begins in the extremities, a heaviness in the feet and legs, a growing numbness that starts to creep upwards. The messages from the brain are still being sent. The thought, "move my leg," is formed. The action potential travels perfectly down the long axon from the spinal cord. The acetylcholine is released into the synapse, but it finds the receptors already occupied or shut down. The message arrives, but there is no one left to hear it. Crucially, coniine does not readily cross the blood-brain barrier. So as this creeping paralysis ascends the body, the mind remains perfectly horrifyingly clear. The victim is aware, trapped within a body that is slowly turning to stone. The paralysis climbs, affecting the arms, the neck, and finally the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles between the ribs, the muscles that power the lungs. Breathing becomes a conscious, difficult effort, and then it becomes impossible. The brain, starved of oxygen, finally succumbs. Death arrives not as a chaotic delirium, but as a profound and spreading silence. It is a chemical suffocation, a stillness imposed by a simple molecule from an innocent-looking weed. To compare the two, atropine and coniine, is to see the work of two different kinds of molecular engineers. One is a saboteur, creating a key that jams the lock. The other is a zealot, creating a key that turns the lock so violently that the mechanism breaks. Both are alkaloids, both mimic acetylcholine, yet they achieve their deadly purpose through opposing philosophies of chemical interference, one by profound silence, the other by a deafening shout. The diversity of strategy, even within this one narrow field of toxins, is staggering. It is as if every plant has been given a unique chemical puzzle to solve, how to defend itself. And the solutions they have evolved are as varied and as ingenious as life itself. So far, we have remained in the realm of the nervous system, the world of whispers and electricity, but there is another fundamental system that life depends upon, a rhythm that begins before birth and continues until the very end, the beat of the heart. And it should come as no surprise that plants have found keys to this lock as well. Let us journey to a different part of the forest, to a place where a tall, stately plant grows, with a spire of beautiful bell-shaped flowers, often purple or white, speckled within. This is Digitalis purpurea, the common foxglove. For centuries, herbalists knew it was a powerful plant, capable of treating dropsy, the swelling caused by a failing heart, but also capable of causing sudden death. It walked the razor's edge between medicine and poison. The chemicals responsible are not alkaloids. They belong to a different class of molecules known as cardiac glycosides. The two most famous are digoxin and digitoxin. These molecules have a complex, rigid structure based on a steroid nucleus with a sugar molecule attached to one end. This unique shape allows them to interfere with one of the most fundamental pieces of machinery in our cells. Inside the membrane of almost every animal cell, and especially in the cells of the heart muscle, there is a microscopic engine called the sodium-potassium pump. Think of it as a tireless molecular doorman. Its job is to maintain the delicate balance of ions inside and outside the cell. For every 3 sodium ions it pushes out of the cell, it brings 2 potassium ions in. This process is happening billions of times a second in every part of your body. It is one of the foundational processes that allows for nerve impulses, muscle contractions, and the very stability of our cells. It is the steady background hum of life. The cardiac glycoside, digoxin, is a master saboteur of this pump. Its specific shape allows it to bind to the pump and inhibit it. It essentially jams the doorman's revolving door. The pump slows down, or in high enough concentrations, stops working altogether. Now follow the cascade of consequences within a heart muscle cell. If sodium is not being pumped out, its concentration inside the cell begins to rise. The cell's interior becomes saltier. This rising sodium level, in turn, affects another molecular machine, the sodium-calcium exchanger. Its job is to use the low sodium gradient to push calcium out of the cell. But with sodium levels now high inside the cell, this exchanger doesn't work as well. Sometimes it even runs in reverse. The result is that calcium, the ultimate trigger for muscle contraction, begins to build up inside the heart muscle cell. And with more calcium available with each beat, the contraction of the heart becomes stronger. The squeeze becomes more forceful. This is the medicinal genius of Digitalis. In a failing heart, a heart that has become weak and inefficient, this controlled poisoning can restore its strength, allowing it to pump blood more effectively and relieve the fluid buildup of congestive heart failure. It is a perfect example of the principle articulated by Paracelsus: the dose makes the poison. A small, controlled amount of disruption can restore order to a chaotic system. But if the dose is too high, the journey from medicine to poison is swift and catastrophic. As more and more of the sodium-potassium pumps are shut down, the calcium levels inside the cells continue to rise, reaching chaotic, toxic levels. The heart's electrical conduction system, which depends on the precise rhythmic flow of ions, is thrown into disarray. The orderly beat begins to falter. Extra phantom beats may appear. The heart might skip a beat or race uncontrollably. The beautiful coordinated contraction of the heart chambers, the lub-dub that is the sound of life, can descend into a useless quivering shudder known as fibrillation. The muscle fibers are all contracting, but they are doing so chaotically, without unison. The heart writhes like a bag of worms, pumping no blood at all. The circulation stops, and in a matter of minutes, the brain, deprived of its vital oxygen, ceases to function. This is death by foxglove. It is not a dismantling of the mind, nor a silencing of the muscles. It is the breaking of the body's primary rhythm, a chemical attack on the most fundamental engine of our biology. The beauty of the foxglove flower hides a molecule perfectly evolved to stop a beating heart. It is a quiet, unassuming plant that has mastered the chemistry of cardiac arrest. And so we see 3 distinct pathways to lethality, 3 different molecular philosophies forged in the silent, competitive world of plants. The nightshades, with their tropane alkaloids, attack the mind, creating a waking nightmare by blocking the channels of communication. The hemlock, with its simple coniine, attacks the body, creating a silent prison by overwhelming the link between nerve and muscle. And the foxglove, with its complex glycosides, attacks the very rhythm of life, bringing the central engine to a chaotic halt. Any one of these could be a candidate for the fictional Devil's Foot route. The story describes both madness and death, and it is entirely plausible that a single plant could contain a cocktail of different toxins, or that one toxin could produce a spectrum of effects depending on the dose and the individual. Nature is rarely so neat as to put its poisons in separate boxes. What is truly profound is to realize that these molecules were not designed with us in mind. They are the incidental masterpieces of an ancient arms race. A plant that developed a bitter taste was less likely to be eaten. A plant that developed a chemical that sickened an insect or a deer was more likely to survive and pass on its genes. Over millions of generations, this pressure refined these chemical defenses into forms of exquisite and terrifying potency. These neurotoxins and cardiotoxins are a plant's silent, unthinking answer to the question of survival. They are not evil. They are not malicious. They are simply solutions. Solutions written in the language of atoms and bonds, solutions that happen to fit perfectly into the locks that run our own bodies. As you lie here ready for sleep, feel the quiet, steady rhythm of your own systems. Your heart is beating in a slow, perfect cadence. The balance of sodium and potassium and calcium maintained with an effortless grace. Your breathing is deep and regular, the commands from your brainstem traveling uninterrupted to your diaphragm. And in your mind, the gentle tide of neurotransmitters ebbs and flows, allowing consciousness to soften, to let go of the day, and to drift into the world of dreams. All of this is happening without your command. It is the result of 1 billion years of evolution perfecting a stable, resilient system. The poisons we have spoken of are terrifying because they reveal the fragility that underlies this resilience. They show us the locks we never knew we had, by presenting us with the keys that can break them. And in that knowledge, there is not fear, but a deeper, more profound appreciation for the sheer breathtaking miracle of a body and mind in peaceful, harmonious function. Let that appreciation be your final thought. A quiet thank you to the silent, tireless machinery within you as it carries you safely through the night into sleep, deep and restful sleep. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. A most Victorian demise, poison, panic, and the birth of forensic science. That fragility that underlies this resilience. They show us the locks we never knew we had, by presenting us with the keys that can break them. And in that knowledge there is not fear, but a deeper, more profound appreciation for the sheer, breathtaking miracle of a body and mind in peaceful, harmonious function. Let that appreciation be your final thought. A quiet thank you to the silent, tireless machinery within you as it carries you safely through the night into sleep, deep and restful sleep. And yet, for a moment, let's remain in that place of locks and keys. Let's drift back in time, not to the ancient world of Hemlock and Socrates, but to a time much closer to our own, a time of gaslight and steam, of incredible progress and profound hidden anxieties. Let's drift into the world that gave us Sherlock Holmes himself, the 19th century. Because to truly understand a fictional terror like the Devil's Foot route, we first have to understand the very real terror it was born from. Imagine, if you will, the street corner chemist, the apothecary. It's a place we might picture as quaint, a beautiful relic of a bygone era. We see the dark wood, the gleaming brass scales, the rows upon rows of elegant glass bottles with Latin labels and ground glass stoppers. We can almost smell it, a dry, complex scent of dried herbs, of alcohol, of strange chemical salts, of paper and of dust. It was a place of healing, a place of relief. A mother could go there for a soothing syrup for her teething child. A man could find a tincture for his cough, a woman a powder for her nerves. It was the pharmacy, the corner store, and the doctor's office all rolled into one. But nestled there, on those same shelves, sitting innocently between the chamomile and the cloves, was death. It sat there, bottled and boxed, sold without prescription, without question, and often without any real understanding of its power. The 19th century wasn't just an age of invention, It was, in its own quiet, domestic way, the golden age of poison. Let's look closer at one of those bottles. A simple paper packet, perhaps. Inside, a fine white powder. It has no taste, no smell. It dissolves easily in a cup of tea, a bowl of soup, a glass of wine. If you were to purchase it, you might simply sign a ledger, stating you needed it for the rats in the cellar, or perhaps to kill insects on your roses, and the chemist would nod, wrap it up, and sell it to you for a few pence. This was arsenic trioxide, known, with a chilling and familiar whisper, as the inheritance powder. For the aspiring poisoner of the Victorian era, arsenic was the perfect tool. Its greatest asset was its insidious subtlety. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning, the terrible stomach cramps, the nausea, the vomiting, the dehydration, were almost indistinguishable from the common and often fatal ailments of the day, like cholera or dysentery. In an age before modern sanitation, when food poisoning was rampant and diseases swept through cities like wildfire, a death from arsenic poisoning would rarely raise an eyebrow. A doctor, if one were even called, would likely diagnose it as gastric fever or acute indigestion, sign the death certificate, and the family would move on to the funeral. It was a chemical ghost, a murder weapon that erased its own fingerprints, and its availability was simply astonishing to our modern minds. It wasn't just sold by chemists, it was everywhere. It was a key ingredient in flypaper. You could buy sheets of sticky arsenic-laced paper, soak them in water, and be left with a potent, poisonous solution. It was in sheep dip, in rat poison, in weed killer, but most disturbingly, it was in the very fabric of the home. Let's step out of the apothecary and into a well-to-do Victorian parlour. The gas lights cast a warm, flickering glow on the heavy velvet curtains and the ornate furniture, and the walls are covered in the most magnificent wallpaper, a vibrant, almost luminous green. This colour, known as Shields green or Paris green, was incredibly fashionable. It was a shade of nature, of life, of springtime, and it was made with copper arsenite. In a damp climate like Britain's, the paste holding the paper to the wall would grow mould, and that mould would metabolize the arsenic in the pigment, releasing it into the air as a toxic gas. Occupants of these beautiful green rooms would begin to suffer from chronic, low-dose arsenic poisoning. They would waste away with mysterious illnesses. Their children, who spent the most time in the nursery with its cheerful green wallpaper, were often the most affected. Doctors were baffled. They blamed the damp air, weak constitutions, 100 other things. All the while, the very walls of the home were quietly, gently, exuding a poisonous breath. It's a chilling thought, a room designed for comfort and beauty, becoming a slow, inexorable gas chamber. This was the environment that bred a unique kind of fear. The world outside was dangerous, of course, with its industrial accidents and its rampant diseases, but the Victorian fear of poison was a fear of the intimate. It was the fear of the teacup, the medicine bottle, the loving hand that prepared your meal. Murder wasn't a stranger in a dark alley. It was a whisper in the parlour. It was the spouse who wanted a new life, the relative who coveted an inheritance, the business partner who saw an opportunity. Poison leveled the playing field. It required no strength, no violence, just a steady hand and a cold heart. And for a long, long time it was almost untraceable. The body of the victim held its secrets close. Once buried, the evidence seemed gone forever. But science, the great engine of the 19th century, was beginning to catch up. The forces of order were searching for a way to make the invisible visible. The story of this shift, the birth of what we now call forensic toxicology, begins with one man and a fiendishly clever piece of glassware. His name was James Marsh. Marsh was a chemist working at the Royal Arsenal in London in the 1830s. He was asked to help in a murder trial. A man was accused of poisoning his grandfather with arsenic slipped into his coffee. Marsh had a test for arsenic, a rather crude one by today's standards. He could take samples from the stomach contents, mix them with chemicals, and produce a yellow precipitate if arsenic was present. He performed his test, and found the telltale yellow substance. He brought his evidence to court, a flask containing the yellow proof. But by the time he presented it to the jury, the chemical had decomposed. It was no longer yellow, it was unstable. The jury was confused, the evidence was murky, and the accused murderer was acquitted. Marsh was furious. He felt that a killer had walked free because chemistry had failed to speak clearly enough. He became obsessed with finding a better way, a test that was not only sensitive enough to detect even trace amounts of arsenic, but one that would produce undeniable, stable physical proof, evidence that a jury could see and touch and believe. He spent years experimenting in his laboratory, and what he created was a work of simple genius that would change the course of criminal justice forever. It became known as the Marsh test. Picture it. It's not a complex supercomputer. It's a piece of laboratory art, all glass and flame. It begins with a flask, a gas-generating bottle. Inside, you place the sample you want to test, stomach contents, tissue, a suspicious powder found at the scene. To this, you add a piece of zinc and some sulfuric acid. The acid reacts with the zinc to produce hydrogen gas, which bubbles up through the sample. Now, if arsenic is present, a chemical reaction occurs. The nascent hydrogen, in its incredibly reactive state, combines with the arsenic to form a new gas called arsine. Arsine gas, Ash3, is itself incredibly toxic, but it's also the key. This gas is then piped through a glass tube, and this is where the magic happens. The middle of this glass tube is heated with a flame, a small spirit lamp perhaps. When the invisible arsine gas passes through this hot zone, it decomposes. It breaks back down into hydrogen and elemental arsenic. And the arsenic, a metal, deposits on the cool part of the glass tube just beyond the flame. And what you are left with is the ghost made solid, a beautiful silvery black mirror-like stain on the inside of the glass tube. The arsenic mirror. It was unmistakable. It was stable. You could break the tube and show the piece to the jury. It could detect amounts of arsenic 100 times smaller than any previous test. To call this a breakthrough is an understatement. It was a revolution contained in a piece of glass tubing. Chemistry, it seemed, was tired of being a silent witness. It had found its voice, and its first word was j'accuse. The Marsh test was first used successfully in a public trial in 1840, in the case of a poisoner named Marie Lafarge in France. It caused a sensation. The public was captivated. Suddenly, the perfect crime was no longer perfect. The poisoner's greatest ally, invisibility, had been stripped away. Science could now reach beyond the grave. It could exhume a body months, even years later, and force it to tell its secrets. The great forensic pathologist Alfred Swain Taylor, a contemporary of Marsh, famously remarked that arsenic absorbs into all of our tissues. It becomes part of us. It lingers in the bones, the hair, the fingernails, and with the Marsh test, detectives could now find it. This new power, this almost supernatural ability to see the unseeable, sparked a fire in the public imagination. People were both thrilled and terrified. The newspapers, now cheap and widely available, were filled with breathless, sensational accounts of poisoning trials. The scientific expert, the chemist who could walk into a courtroom with his strange apparatus and reveal the truth, became a new kind of hero. He was a wizard of the modern age, using reason and experiment to fight the darkest of human impulses. But arsenic, for all its infamy, was not the only player on this dark stage. As science developed a defense against one poison, others waited in the wings. Let's return to our apothecary's shelf. Next to the arsenic, there might be a small bottle containing tiny, hard, greyish seeds. They look harmless, like something you might find in a spice rack. These are the seeds of the Strychnos nux vomica tree, the poison nut tree of Southeast Asia, and from them is derived one of the most terrifying poisons known to man, strychnine. If arsenic was the quiet assassin, strychnine was the screaming, theatrical murderer. Its action on the body is nothing short of explosive. It is a neurotoxin. To understand what it does, we need to take a brief journey into the quiet, elegant world of our own nervous system. Every time you move a muscle, a complex conversation takes place. Your brain sends an electrical signal down your spinal cord. This signal tells a motor neuron to fire, instructing a muscle, say in your arm, to contract. But for controlled movement to happen, there also needs to be a signal that says stop. Once the muscle has contracted, other inhibitory neurons release a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger called glycine. Glycine binds to receptors on the motor neurons and essentially tells them to calm down, to relax. It's a beautifully balanced system of go signals and stop signals, excitation and inhibition. It's this balance that allows you to pick up a teacup with a steady hand, instead of having your arm jerk uncontrollably. Strychnine is an antagonist of the glycine receptor. It is a chemical vandal. It gets into the spinal cord and blocks the ports where glycine is supposed to dock. It effectively cuts the brake lines of the nervous system. The go signals can still be sent, but the stop signals are never received. The muscles are told to contract, but they are never ever told to relax. The result is a convulsion of unimaginable violence. The victim remains fully, horribly conscious. A sound, a touch, a sudden light can be enough to trigger a full-body seizure. All the muscles of the body contract at once, with titanic force, The back arches, often so powerfully that it can break the spine. This signature arching is called opisthetonus. The limbs go rigid, the jaw clamps shut in a terrifying grin known as risus sardonicus. The chest muscles lock down, making breathing impossible. The victim suffocates, their mind clear, their body a prison of unrelenting, agonizing contraction. Unlike arsenic, there was no hiding a death by strychnine. It was a loud, public, horrifying spectacle, but it was still difficult to prove. The poison is metabolized and eliminated from the body relatively quickly, and the violent convulsions could, to an untrained eye, be mistaken for other conditions, like tetanus. It took the development of even more sophisticated chemical tests in the mid-19th century to reliably detect it in a victim's tissues. The cases involving strychnine were infamous. The trial of Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, the Lambeth poisoner, who killed several women with strychnine in the 1890s, was a media circus. He would offer his victims what he claimed were pills for their ailments, only for them to die in agony hours later. He was a true monster, a predator who used medicine as his weapon, and the public followed every detail of his trial, fascinated by the scientific evidence that brought him to justice. Now let's turn our gaze to one final bottle on that crowded Victorian shelf. This one is perhaps the most common of all. It's a small dark blue bottle, often ribbed or uniquely shaped. This was a primitive form of safety warning, so you could identify it by touch in a dark room. Inside is a dark, syrupy liquid with a bitter, cloying smell. This is laudanum. Laudanum was not seen in the same light as arsenic or strychnine. It wasn't just a poison, it was the universal medicine of the 19th century. A tincture of opium. It was a mixture of morphine, codeine, and other alkaloids dissolved in alcohol, and it was a panacea. Did you have a toothache? Take laudanum. A cough? Laudanum. Diarrhea? Laudanum. Were your nerves frayed from the stress of modern life? Laudanum. Was your baby crying and keeping you awake all night? A few drops of a soothing syrup containing opium, like Godfrey's cordial, would quiet them right down. It was sold everywhere, by everyone. Chemists, grocers, even corner shops sold it. It was cheaper than gin, and it was used by people from every walk of life, from the poor factory worker trying to numb the pain of a 14-hour workday, to the high society lady seeking relief from boredom and hysteria, to the great romantic poets and writers who believed it unlocked the doors of creativity. The writer Thomas de Quincey wrote a famous book about his experiences with it, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a lifelong addict. Laudanum was the Victorian era's secret sorrow. It offered a quiet, warm escape from a harsh world. Its mechanism is something we are now very familiar with. The opiates within it bind to opioid receptors in the brain, the spinal cord and the gut. This blocks pain signals, produces feelings of euphoria, and slows down bodily functions. It's an incredibly effective painkiller, but it is also, of course, incredibly addictive. And it was an insidious poison precisely because it was seen as a friend. Accidental overdose was tragically common. A person in pain might take a dose, and when the pain didn't subside immediately, they might take another, and then another. The opiates would begin to accumulate in their system. The key action of an overdose is the depression of the respiratory center in the brainstem. This is the ancient, unconscious part of your brain that remembers to tell your lungs to breathe. Laudanum is like a gentle hand pressing down on this system. The breathing becomes slower and shallower. It's like a dimmer switch being slowly, inexorably turned down. The user simply becomes sleepy, drifts into a coma, and then stops breathing. It was a quiet, peaceful-looking death, often mistaken for falling asleep and never waking up. The widespread use of laudanum created a society riddled with addiction, a silent epidemic that was rarely spoken of in polite company, and it was another tool for the poisoner. A deliberate overdose could easily be made to look like an accident. Oh, he must have been in so much pain. He took too much of his medicine by mistake. It was another domestic tragedy, played out in thousands of homes. So this was the world of the late 19th century. A world of incredible scientific advancement, but also a world saturated with easily accessible, potent poisons. A society that was at once fascinated and terrified by the power of chemistry. The newspapers were filled with these stories. The penny dreadfuls, cheap sensationalist booklets, told lurid tales of poison plots. Poison had become a character in the great drama of modern life, and it's from this very specific cultural soup of fear and fascination that a new kind of hero had to be born. The old-fashioned detective, the policeman who relied on witness testimony and brute force, was no match for the subtle scientific killer. Society needed someone who could fight chemistry with chemistry, someone who could look at a splash of mud on a trouser leg and deduce the geology of its origin, someone who could distinguish between 140 different types of tobacco ash, someone who kept a chemical laboratory in his own sitting room. Society needed a scientific detective, and Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a physician by training, gave them one. Sherlock Holmes is not just a character. He is the perfect embodiment of his time. He is the personification of the hope that reason, observation, and the scientific method could bring order to the chaos of the modern industrial world. He is James Marsh, with a magnifying glass. He is the forensic expert, as a romantic hero. When Holmes examines a crime scene, he is not just looking for clues, he is reading a text written in the language of science. He understands that the world is full of data, if one only knows how to see it. And this brings us back, finally, to our mysterious plant, the devil's foot root. Conan Doyle, with his medical background, would have been intimately familiar with arsenic, strychnine, and laudanum. He knew about the Marsh test. He knew that science was winning the war against the poisoner. So to create a truly baffling mystery for his great detective, he couldn't just use a common poison. That would be too easy for Holmes. He had to invent something new, something that would represent the ultimate Victorian nightmare, a poison that science did not yet know. The devil's foot root, Radix pedis diaboli, is a masterstroke of invention, precisely because of the context it was written in. It's not just any poison, it is an exotic poison. It comes from the dark continent of Africa, a place that to the Victorian mind was full of mystery, danger, and savage secrets. It played on the fear of the unknown, the fear of the foreign, the idea that the vast British Empire was bringing back not just riches, but also strange new dangers. And its method is unique. It's not ingested, it's a resin that when burned releases a vapor. It's an airborne poison. This circumvents all the standard methods of detection of the time, which were focused on testing stomach contents and tissues. How do you test the very air of a room? Its effect is also psychologically terrifying. It doesn't just kill, It drives its victims mad with an unspeakable terror before it stops their hearts. It attacks the mind, the very seat of reason that Holmes holds so dear. It's a poison that seems to induce a spiritual horror, not just a physical one. It's a substance so potent that one of the explorers who found it went insane, and the other died of fear upon seeing it again. This is what makes it the ultimate poison for its era. It is in essence a challenge to the entire project of forensic science. The Marsh test could find arsenic. Chemical analysis could find strychnine. But how could science fight a poison that leaves no trace, a poison that kills with pure terror? It was a poison for Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes alone. It required a mind that could work beyond the established boundaries of the laboratory, a mind that could solve a crime not with a test tube, but with pure cold deduction. The Devil's Foot route is a work of fiction, a brilliant one, but it feels real because the fear it taps into was absolutely profoundly real. It was the fear of a society that had just begun to understand the invisible chemical world around it and within it. They had learned that their bodies were intricate machines, full of locks and keys, and they were terrified by the thought that somewhere out there, in some unexplored jungle or some forgotten apothecary bottle, there might be a key for which science had not yet found a name, a key that could unlock not just death, but madness itself. And so, as we let this chapter of our story close, we can appreciate the intricate dance that was played out in the 19th century. The quiet, deadly dance between the poisoner and the scientist. A race between the chemistry of destruction and the chemistry of detection. It was a battle fought in courtrooms, in laboratories, and in the pages of newspapers. A battle that shaped our modern systems of justice and gave birth to some of our most enduring stories. Let that history settle. Let the gaslights dim. The world of secret poisons and chemical dread can fade away now. It's a world that belongs to the past, a chapter in a book we can now close, and we can return to the peace of our own bodies, to the quiet, trustworthy rhythm of our own breath. The locks are secure. The machinery is sound. There is nothing to fear here. In the gentle dark, there is only rest, only peace, only the slow, steady drift into deep and dreamless sleep. Chapter 6. The Cornish Crucible. Landscape, folklore, and the real flora of the Lizard Peninsula. And where better to find such a peace, where better to let the mind drift and dream, than in a place where the land itself seems to dream. A place where the waking world and the world of sleep feel closer, separated only by a thin veil of sea mist. We can leave behind the locked rooms and gaslit streets of London, the cold, analytical world of chemistry and crime. We can let that world dissolve, and in its place allow a new landscape to rise around us. A landscape at the very edge of the map, a peninsula of ancient rock reaching out into the vast, breathing expanse of the Atlantic. Let us go there now, in our minds. Let the air grow soft and salty around you. Feel the city fall away, replaced by the sound of a constant, gentle wind and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean. We are travelling southwest, to the very tip of England, to Cornwall, and not just to Cornwall, but to its most remote and mysterious finger of land, the Lizard Peninsula. This is the setting Arthur Conan Doyle chose for his strange tale of the Radix Pedis Diaboli, and it was no accident. He knew, as anyone who has ever stood on those cliffs knows, that this is not just a piece of geography. It is a place with a palpable atmosphere, a genius loci, a spirit of place so powerful it seeps into stories, into folklore, and into the very soul of the people who live there. It is a place where the bizarre feels possible, where an exotic poison from a far-off land could conceivably wash up, take root, and be woven into the fabric of local legend. To understand the story, we must first understand the stage on which it is set. The Lizard is a crucible, a place where unique elements are brought together under pressure to create something new and extraordinary. The first and most fundamental of these elements lies right beneath our feet. Before we even consider a single leaf or flower, we must feel the rock. Imagine standing on a clifftop path. Now look down. The rock here is unlike almost any other in Britain. It is not the familiar grey of granite or the pale chalk of the south coast. It is a deep, dark, almost brooding stone, often a shade of olive or forest green, shot through with veins of red and white. It can have a waxy, almost soapy luster. When it meets the sea, the constant polishing action of the waves can make it shine like a reptile's skin. This is serpentine, and its story is the story of the lizard itself. This rock wasn't born here. It is an ancient traveller, a piece of a world that no longer exists. 400 million years ago, this was not land at all. It was the floor of a long-vanished ocean, the Reich Ocean, and the rock beneath us was part of the Earth's oceanic crust, miles deep beneath the water. Through the colossal, slow-motion violence of plate tectonics, as continents collided, a piece of this deep ocean floor was scraped off, buckled, and thrust upwards, over and onto the continental plate. Geologists have a wonderfully dramatic name for this process: obduction. It's as if the deep earth turned itself inside out, offering up a piece of its hidden mantle for the sun and the rain to see. The Lizard Peninsula is one of the largest and best preserved examples of such an ophiolite complex in Europe. To walk here is to walk on the fossilized floor of a primeval sea, and this has profound consequences for everything that tries to live here. The serpentine rock, born in the deep earth, is fundamentally alien to the needs of most plants. It is what a gardener might call a difficult soil. It is incredibly low in the essential nutrients that plants crave: calcium, potassium, phosphorus, but it is rich, almost toxically so, in heavy metals like magnesium, nickel, and chromium. To grow here is to be a specialist, an extremophile, an organism that has learned to make a living where others would instantly wither. It is a landscape that demands resilience. It breeds a unique kind of life, hardy and strange. This soil, this foundation of serpentine, is the first ingredient in the Cornish crucible. It dictates the terms of survival. Now, let us feel the second element. Stand on that cliff top again. Close your eyes and just feel the air on your skin. It is soft. It is humid. Even in the depths of winter, it rarely carries the biting, crystalline chill of a true frost. There is a gentleness to it, a mildness that seems utterly at odds with the rugged, wind-scoured landscape around you. This is the second ingredient, the warm, invisible river in the ocean known as the Gulf Stream. This colossal current, an oceanic conveyor belt, brings warm water all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, sweeping past the Cornish coast. It acts as a vast storage heater for the entire peninsula, wrapping it in a temperate blanket. The sea here is several degrees warmer than it should be for its latitude. This creates the great Cornish paradox, a wild, Atlantic-battered landscape that can host subtropical plants. It is a place of fierce gales and soft, misty rains, of resilient, salt-tolerant natives and delicate, exotic visitors. So we have our crucible, the strange, nutrient-poor, metal-rich rock below, and the mild, damp, frost-free air above. These two forces, one from the deep earth and one from the distant tropics, meet here at the edge of the world, and in the space between them, a unique tapestry of life has been woven. Let's walk inland from the cliffs, just a little, onto the heath. The ground here is a springy, dense carpet of low-growing shrubs. The dominant colour for much of the year is a patchwork of greens and deep, earthy browns, but in late summer, it explodes into a sea of purple, lilac and pink. This is the kingdom of the heathers, and the lizard has its very own, Erica vagans, known simply as Cornish heath. It grows here in abundance, more so than anywhere else in Britain. It is a beautiful plant. Its flowers are delicate pale pink or white, arranged in elegant racemes. It thrives on the serpentine soil, its roots forming a partnership with mycorrhizal fungi, a microscopic underground network that helps the plant scavenge for the scarce nutrients the rock is so reluctant to give up. The fungus acts as an extension of the plant's own root system, a vast, patient web of delicate threads exploring the soil, breaking down what little organic matter there is and trading those precious resources with the heather in exchange for sugars the plant produces through photosynthesis. It is a silent, ancient partnership, a pact of survival made between two different kingdoms of life. Lean down and touch the foliage. It's small, needle-like, designed to conserve water in the face of the drying winds. This is a landscape shaped by the wind as much as by the rock. It is a constant presence, a sculptor that shapes the trees into gnarled, hunched forms, all leaning away from the prevailing southwesterlies. It whispers and sighs through the gorse and the heather, a sound that becomes the background hum of life on the peninsula. And the gorse, you can smell it before you see it. On a warm day, the air on the heath is thick with its scent, a warm, sweet, intoxicating perfume of coconut and vanilla. Its flowers are a defiant, brilliant yellow, a splash of pure sunshine even on the greyest of days. But to get to them is to reckon with its defence. The gorse is a fortress of spines, a plant that has armoured itself to perfection against grazing animals. In the folklore of the region, it is a plant of protection. It was said that planting gorse around a home would keep the piskies, the mischievous fairy folk of Cornwall, from leading you astray. It is a perfect symbol for this place, beautiful but fierce, welcoming in its scent but guarded in its nature. Let's leave the heath now and walk back towards the sea, towards the sound of the waves. The path narrows and the sheer drop to the water becomes more apparent. Here, on the very edge of the land, clinging to the cliff faces, is another community of specialists. These are the halophytes, the salt lovers, plants that have evolved to not just tolerate, but thrive in an environment constantly bathed in salt spray. Look for the dense, vibrant pink cushions of thrift, or sea pink. It grows in tight, dome-like mounds, its roots gripping fissures in the rock. In late spring, it sends up slender stalks topped with perfect globes of pink flowers, dancing in the sea breeze. It's an act of impossible delicacy in a place of such raw power. The plant has evolved special glands on its leaves to excrete excess salt, a tiny, brilliant piece of biological engineering that allows it to drink from the sea mist without poisoning itself. Beside it, you might find rock samphire, its fleshy, succulent leaves looking almost edible. And they are. For centuries it was harvested by cliff climbers as a prized wild food, pickled and sent to the cities. Its taste is pungent, salty and aromatic, the very essence of the coast itself. To survive here, it stores water in its leaves, another adaptation to the drying effects of salt and wind. It is a survivor, a testament to the quiet, stubborn persistence of life. And everywhere, the lichens, they are the true masters of this exposed world. They are not a single organism, but a composite, a symbiotic partnership between a fungus and an alga or cyanobacteria. The fungus provides the structure, the house, gripping the bare rock. The alga, tucked safely inside, provides the food through photosynthesis. Together they can survive where neither could alone. They are pioneers, the first to colonize the barest stone. Look closely at the cliff face. It is a map of slow time, painted in patches of brilliant orange xanthoria, of dusty grey-greens and velvety blacks. Some of these patches may be centuries old, growing only a fraction of a millimeter each year. They are living clocks, measuring out a timescale far grander than our own. To stand here, on these cliffs, is to feel the immense weight of that time. The serpentine rock beneath you tells a story of 400 million years of vanished oceans and continental collisions. The lichens tell a story of centuries of slow, patient growth. And the sea before you, the Atlantic, tells a story of millennia, of endless rhythmic sculpting, grinding the hard rock into sand, carving coves and sea stacks with an artist's indifferent patience. It is in a place like this, a place of deep time and powerful natural forces, that folklore is born. The landscape itself becomes a storyteller. A strangely shaped rock is not just an accident of erosion. It is a giant turned to stone. A hole in a cliff that booms and sprays water with the rising tide is not just hydraulics, it is the breath of a sea dragon. the swirling sea mists that can roll in without warning, swallowing the land and muffling all sound, are not just meteorology, they are a magical shroud, a veil to the other world. Cornwall is steeped in these stories. Stories of piskies who delight in tangling the manes of horses and leading travellers off the path. Stories of the knockers, the spirits of the mines, whose knocking sounds deep underground could lead a miner to a rich lode of tin or to a deadly collapse. And stories of the sea, wreckers and smugglers who used the treacherous coastline and its hidden coves to their advantage. Mermaids, seen basking on the rocks at Kynant's Cove, and the lost land of Lyonesse, a kingdom said to have sunk beneath the waves between Land's End and the Isles of Scilly, its church bells still ringing on stormy nights. This is the human atmosphere of the lizard, layered on top of its unique geology and botany. It's a place where the line between the real and the magical has always been blurry. It is a culture that has lived in intimate, and often fearful, respect for the power of the natural world. Plants were not just plants, they were ingredients for charms and potions. Hawthorn trees were gateways to the fairy realm, and it was desperately bad luck to cut one down. Foxgloves were known as pisky bells, and the distinctive spots inside their flowers were said to be the marks of fairy fingers. This is the world that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson step into, a world far removed from the rational, ordered streets of London. They arrive in a place where a story of a devil's foot root that can drive men mad or kill them with horror would not have been dismissed out of hand. It would have found fertile ground in the local imagination, a new story to be woven into the ancient tapestry of myth and mystery. The genius of Conan Doyle's choice of setting is that the Lizard Peninsula feels like a place where such a thing could exist. It is already so strange, so unique, so other, that the introduction of a deadly psychoactive plant from Africa feels less like a wild invention and more like just one more strange ingredient added to an already potent crucible. And there is one final secret side to this landscape that makes the idea even more plausible. We have seen the exposed heathland and the storm-battered cliffs, but tucked away in the sheltered valleys, protected from the wind and nurtured by the Gulf Stream's warmth, are pockets of an entirely different world. Let's imagine leaving the clifftop path and following a small stream as it cuts its way down towards a hidden cove. As we descend, the wind drops away, the air becomes still, heavy and damp. The sounds of the sea and the wind are replaced by the gentle trickle of the stream and the rustle of leaves. The vegetation changes dramatically. The low, hardy heath gives way to lush, almost tropical growth. Here, in these sheltered Cornish valleys, are the famous subtropical gardens, places like Trebor and Glendurgan. To step into them is to feel as if you have been instantly transported thousands of miles away. Here you will find giant tree ferns from New Zealand, their magnificent fronds creating a dense primordial canopy. You will see huge stands of bamboo and Chusan palms from China. In the spring, the valleys are filled with the spectacular, vibrant colours of rhododendrons and magnolias from the Himalayas. And most astonishing of all, you might see the gunera, or giant rhubarb from South America, with leaves so enormous that a single one can act as an umbrella. These gardens are a living testament to the power of the Cornish microclimate. They prove that plants from all over the world, from Africa, from Asia, from South America, can indeed take root and flourish here. They make the central premise of Holmes's story, that a plant from West Africa could be cultivated in a Cornish garden, not just believable, but entirely possible. Dr. Sterndale's quiet cottage, with its garden full of exotic specimens, is not a fantasy. It is a reflection of a botanical reality that exists all over this peninsula. So, the crucible is complete. We have the ancient alien rock, creating a soil that fosters unique and resilient life. We have the gentle warming breath of the Gulf Stream, creating a climate of paradox. We have the wild, windswept heaths and cliffs, home to a tough community of native specialists. We have the deep, resonant folklore of a people living on the edge of the world, a culture steeped in magic and mystery. And we have the secret, sheltered valleys, where the exotic can and does take root. This is the landscape of the Devil's Foot route. It is a place that feels simultaneous like the heart of ancient Britain and a remote colonial outpost where strange things from across the sea can arrive and put down roots. It's a landscape that invites you to believe in the impossible. It blurs the edges of things, the edge between land and sea, between science and folklore, between the familiar and the profoundly strange. And so now, let this place hold you as you prepare for sleep. Let the sounds and sensations of the Lizard Peninsula become a landscape for your own rest. Feel the springy cushion of the heathland beneath you. Let the air be soft and taste of salt and the sweet scent of gorse. The only sound is the constant soothing whisper of the wind moving through the heather and the deep rhythmic bass of the Atlantic waves breathing against the shore. It is a sound that has been repeating for millennia, a slow, steady pulse of the planet. There are no locked rooms here, no chemical dread. There is only the vast open space of the cliffs under a sky filled with stars, brighter than you could ever see in the city. The dark here is not an absence of light, but a presence of its own. It is a deep, velvet, peaceful dark, full of the soft rustlings of a world that is very much alive. The light from the Lizard Lighthouse sweeps across the landscape in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, a steady, reassuring beacon in the immensity of the night. Let your own breath fall into sync with the rhythm of the waves. A slow, easy inhale as the water rushes up the shingle beach. A long, gentle exhale as it draws back with a soft rattle. In and out. Each wave washing away a little more of the day. Each breath drawing you a little deeper into rest. The land is old here. It holds time differently, and for a little while you can hold it differently too. There is no urgency. There is nothing to solve. The only mystery is the profound and simple peace of this place, this Cornish crucible, as it cradles you and allows you to drift away. Chapter 7. Chapter 7. The Mind of the Creator. Arthur Conan Doyle's Medicine, Mysteries and Mysticism. The water rushes up the shingle beach. A long, gentle exhale as it draws back with a soft rattle. In and out. Each wave washing away a little more of the day. Each breath drawing you a little deeper into rest. The land is old here. It holds time differently. And for a little while you can hold it differently too. There is no urgency. There is nothing to solve. The only mystery is the profound and simple peace of this place, this Cornish crucible as it cradles you and allows you to drift away. And yet, this place, this particular stretch of coast was not chosen by accident. The mind that brought us here, that imagined a strange ochre-coloured dust capable of driving men to madness, was a mind as complex and contradictory as the landscape itself, a mind forged in the gleaming logical furnaces of science, yet one that spent a lifetime seeking echoes and whispers in the dark. To understand the Devil's Foot route, this fictional masterpiece of botanical terror, we must turn our gaze from the plant that might have inspired it and look instead to the man who created it. We must gently close the door on the rugged Cornish coast and step into the quiet, lamplit study of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. For in this one man we find the two powerful currents that swirl at the heart of this story, the cold, diagnostic eye of the physician and the hopeful, searching soul of the mystic. He was a man who gave the world its greatest champion of pure reason, and yet a man who would later champion photographs of fairies. He was a man who understood the intricate chemistry of the human body, and a man who believed he could communicate with the spirits of the dead. It is in this fascinating and deeply human contradiction that the true secret of Radix pedis diaboli is found. It is a poison born from both the laboratory and the seance. Let's begin where he began. Not with stories, but with science. Before Arthur Conan Doyle was a world-famous author, he was Dr. Doyle, a physician trained in one of the finest medical schools of the era, the University of Edinburgh. Picture him as a young man in the late 1870s, walking the grey stone-flagged corridors of the university, the scent of antiseptic carbolic acid, a revolutionary new concept, sharp in the air. This was the dawn of a new age in medicine. For centuries, the physician's art had been a murky blend of tradition, guesswork, and folklore. But in Doyle's time, it was hardening into a rigorous science. The microscope was revealing a hidden world of microbes. The stethoscope was allowing doctors to listen to the very machinery of life, and the study of pharmacology was beginning to codify the precise effects of chemicals on the delicate systems of the body. This was a world of observation, of data, of deduction. And at the heart of this world, for the young Doyle, was a teacher who would change his life, and in turn, change the landscape of popular literature forever. His name was Dr. Joseph Bell. Bell was a surgeon, a lecturer, and a man with an almost uncanny ability for diagnosis. He was tall and wiry, with a sharp, angular face and a piercing gaze. But it wasn't his appearance that was so captivating, it was his method. He taught his students that to truly understand a patient's condition, you must observe everything, not just the stated symptoms, but the whole person. The calluses on their hands, the dust on their shoes, the faint accent in their voice, the tan line on their wrist. He would stand before a patient in the infirmary and with a few curt observations deduce their profession, their recent travels, and their habits, all before even asking about their ailment. To his students, it must have seemed like magic, but Bell insisted it was anything but. The student, he would say, must be taught to observe, to notice the little things. He was, in essence, a detective of the human body. A patient was a puzzle, a collection of clues. Their symptoms were the evidence, their history was their testimony, and the underlying disease was the culprit. It was the physician's job to gather the facts, discard the irrelevant, and from the remaining data, construct an irrefutable theory. Sound familiar? Doyle was mesmerized. He became Bell's outpatient clerk, and day after day, he witnessed these extraordinary feats of deduction. He saw how a seemingly insignificant detail could unlock an entire case history. This was the birth of the scientific method as a tool for storytelling, the very soul of Sherlock Holmes, his cold logic, his focus on minutiae, his almost arrogant confidence in the power of observation was born not in a fictional flat at 221B Baker Street, but in the noisy, crowded wards of the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. Doyle himself would later write to Bell, "It is most certainly to you that I owe Sherlock Holmes round the centre of deduction and inference and observation, which I have heard you inculcate. I have tried to build up a man." So, when Dr. Doyle, the struggling physician, put pen to paper in his quiet office in Southsea, he wasn't just inventing stories, he was transposing his medical training into a new key. The methodical process of diagnosing a case of typhoid was the same process Holmes would use to solve a murder. The careful analysis of a blood sample under a microscope was mirrored in Holmes's analysis of a cigar ash. His creator's world was one of material evidence, of cause and effect, where every mystery had a rational physical solution, if only one were clever enough to find it. This rigorously scientific worldview is precisely what makes the Devil's Foot route so convincing. Doyle, the physician, would have been intimately familiar with his materia medica, the comprehensive body of knowledge about the therapeutic properties of substances, mostly derived from plants. He would have studied botany and pharmacology. He would have known about real-world alkaloids, glycosides, and neurotoxins. He would have learned about plants that could cause hallucinations, paralysis, or cardiac arrest. Belladonna, with its deadly nightshade berries that could dilate the pupils and cause delirium. Foxglove, the source of digitalis, a potent heart medicine that, in the wrong dose, is a lethal poison. Monkshood, or aconite, one of the most famously swift and deadly plant toxins. So, when he sat down to create a fictional poison, he wasn't just pulling a name out of a hat. He was applying his medical knowledge as a kind of speculative engineer. He was designing a poison. He knew it needed a plausible origin, a mysterious plant from a remote, unexplored part of the world, in this case West Africa. This lent it an air of authenticity. The Victorian era was rife with explorers bringing back strange new botanical specimens. He knew it needed a specific mechanism of action. It wasn't a generic poison that simply caused death. It worked on the mind. It induced terror, madness, and then death. This points to a deep understanding of neurotoxins, chemicals that specifically target the nervous system, the very seat of our consciousness and perception. The physical effects described in the story, the contorted limbs, the face frozen in horror, are consistent with severe neurological distress, with the brain's signaling systems thrown into catastrophic chaos. Even the method of delivery, burning the powdered root to release a vapor, is clever. It suggests a volatile compound, one that can be inhaled and cross the blood-brain barrier with terrifying speed. This wasn't the work of a fantasist. It was the work of a trained medical professional creating a what-if scenario, grounded in the principles of real-world toxicology. He built his fictional horror on a foundation of scientific fact, and that is why it feels so chillingly real. The Devil's Foot root is a thought experiment from a 19th century doctor, asking what if there were a substance that could chemically induce the pure, undiluted essence of fear. For many years, this was the man the world knew, Dr. Doyle, the creator of the master logician, a man of science, a man of facts. He was practical, robust, a sportsman, a public figure. He even ran for Parliament twice. He seemed the very model of a solid, rational, late Victorian gentleman. But beneath this surface, another current was flowing, a deeper, quieter, and ultimately more powerful one. And to understand it, we have to understand the immense weight of loss in his life. The world that science described so brilliantly was also a world of profound suffering. Medicine could diagnose, it could sometimes treat, but often it could only stand by, a helpless observer of life's inevitable tragedies. And for Doyle, the tragedies were immense. His first wife, Louise, battled tuberculosis for years, a slow, wasting disease that medicine could do little to halt. He nursed her with a doctor's care, but he had to watch her fade away. The deepest blow, however, came with the Great War. Like so many of his generation, the First World War carved a chasm in his life. His son, Kingsley, was severely wounded at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. He survived his wounds, only to die of pneumonia 2 years later, his body weakened by the conflict. Then, just a few months after, Doyle's beloved younger brother, Innes, a brigadier general, also died of pneumonia, a casualty of the same influenza pandemic that was sweeping the globe. In the space of a few years, the war and its aftermath had taken his son, his brother, 2 brothers-in-law, and 2 nephews. The sheer scale of this loss is hard to comprehend. And for a man like Doyle, the tools of medicine and rational deduction suddenly seemed terribly inadequate. Science could explain the mechanism of death, a bacterial infection, a failing respiratory system. But it could not answer the questions that haunted him, the questions that haunt us all in the face of such grief. Why? What was the meaning of it? And most pressingly of all, is this all there is? Is the vibrant consciousness of a loved one simply extinguished, like a candle flame, wiped away by a microbe, leaving nothing behind? For Doyle, this cold, materialist conclusion was unbearable. His scientific mind had built a world of evidence and logic, but his grieving heart demanded something more. It demanded hope. It demanded continuation. And he found it in a movement that had been quietly gaining strength throughout the 19th century, a movement that promised to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Spiritualism. It wasn't a sudden conversion. Doyle had been interested in psychic phenomena for years, approaching it initially with a researcher's curiosity. But after the devastating losses of the war, this interest deepened into a profound and unwavering faith. Spiritualism offered a direct rebuttal to the finality of death. It proposed that the human personality, the soul, survived the death of the physical body, and that, with the help of gifted individuals known as mediums, communication was possible across the veil. Imagine the contrast. This is the same man whose literary creation Sherlock Holmes famously declared, "The world is big enough for us, no ghosts need apply." And yet this man would now spend his evenings in darkened Victorian parlours, the air thick with anticipation, sitting around a heavy wooden table with a group of other seekers. They would hold hands, the gas lights turned down low, and wait in hushed silence for a sign, a rap on the table, a disembodied voice, a spirit trumpet floating in the gloom, anything that could serve as proof of survival. He attended countless séances. He read every piece of literature on the subject he could find. He investigated mediums, seeking to separate the genuine from the fraudulent, applying a version of his deductive reasoning to this new ethereal world. And he came to believe with all his heart that it was real. He believed he had spoken to his departed son, Kingsley. He believed he had received messages from his brother. For him, this wasn't a superstition. It was a new science, a science of the spirit, whose evidence was just as real and observable as the evidence a doctor gathers from a patient. He became the world's most famous proponent of spiritualism. He poured his fortune and his considerable energy into the cause, traveling the world to give lectures, writing books and pamphlets with titles like The New Revelation and The Vital Message. He engaged in a famous public debate with the great magician and debunker Harry Houdini. The two began as friends, united by a common interest in the subject. But their relationship fractured when Doyle and his wife became convinced they had contacted Houdini's beloved deceased mother in a séance, a message Houdini, the master illusionist, knew to be fraudulent. It was a clash of two worlds, the ultimate skeptic versus the ultimate believer. And so, we have the two halves of Arthur Conan Doyle. The first half, the physician, saw the universe as a grand, intricate clockwork mechanism, a place of laws, of chemistry, of biology, a place that could be understood through careful observation and logical deduction. The second half, the spiritualist, saw the universe as a place permeated with spirit, a multi-layered reality where the souls of the dead existed just beyond our senses, watching over us, waiting for us. How could one man contain both? To many of his contemporaries it seemed a bizarre contradiction, a great mind succumbing to wishful thinking in his later years. But perhaps they were not opposites at all. Perhaps they were two different methods in a single lifelong quest. Both the detective and the spiritualist are, at their core, seekers of hidden truths. They both believe that the surface of reality is deceptive and that a deeper pattern lies beneath. Holmes uses a magnifying glass to find the tiny, overlooked clue that reveals the murderer's plot. The spiritualist uses a medium to perceive the subtle vibration, the whispered message, that reveals the continuity of life after death. Both are attempts to make sense of the universe, to find order in the chaos, to find a signal in the noise. Now let us return to that strange powder from Cornwall. With this understanding of Doyle's dual nature, we can see the devil's foot root in a new light. It is no longer just a clever, scientifically plausible poison. It is the perfect synthesis of the two Doyles, the doctor and the mystic. The physician, Dr. Doyle, designed the poison's physical properties. He gave it a plausible botanical origin, a method of action via inhalation, and a neurological effect that leads to physical contortions and death. This is the materialist, clockwork part of the puzzle. It's a toxin affecting neurons, it's chemistry. But the spiritualist, the seeker Sir Arthur, infused the poison with its true horror. The story is very specific. The victims don't just die of a heart attack or respiratory failure, they die of fear. Mortimer Tregennis describes the effect as inconceivable terror. Dr. Sterndale, who understands the root, calls it a poison which excites the most dreadful delirium of fear. He explains that it attacks the very center of emotion and that the sufferer is driven mad by horror. When Holmes and Watson experience a small dose themselves, Holmes describes it as a subtle and terrific experience that almost cost them their sanity. He speaks of a cloud of horror, a paralysis of the soul, and a sense of utter and overpowering depression. This is not the language of pure clinical medicine. This is the language of something metaphysical. The poison does not just stop the body, it attacks the soul. It chemically induces a spiritual crisis. It forces the victim to experience a glimpse of what can only be described as hell. The insanity it causes isn't just a jumble of misfiring synapses, as a pure materialist might describe it. In the world of the story, it feels like an encounter with a genuine objective evil. The plant becomes a gateway, a chemical key that unlocks a door in the mind to a dimension of pure terror. This is where the two halves of Doyle's mind meet and create something truly unique. The doctor provides the plausible weapon, the chemical agent. The mystic provides the nature of the wound, which is not to the body but to the spirit. The devil's foot root is terrifying, not because it can kill you, but because it can destroy you on your way to death. It can make your last moments on earth a vision of eternal damnation. It's a product of a mind that understood the physical brain down to its nerves and vessels, but also believed in a non-physical soul that could be terrified, that could be lost, that could be overwhelmed by a horror beyond the comprehension of science. And isn't that a profound reflection of the human condition itself? We live in a world that science explains with ever-increasing clarity. We understand the biology of our bodies, the chemistry of our brains, the physics of the cosmos, and yet we still grapple with the great unanswerables. We still feel awe and love and fear. We still grieve. We still search for meaning in a universe that often seems silent. Arthur Conan Doyle lived that contradiction. He embodied it. He created a character in Sherlock Holmes who represented the absolute power of the rational mind, a man for whom every problem was, in the end, solvable with data. Holmes was, in a way, the perfect doctor, the ultimate diagnostician who could cure the ills of society. But Doyle himself knew that some wounds were too deep for logic to heal. He knew that the human heart has questions that a magnifying glass cannot answer. His embrace of spiritualism was not a rejection of science. It was an attempt to extend the scientific method into realms that science itself had declared off limits. It was a profound, and perhaps to us a naive, but deeply sincere attempt to find evidence for hope. He wanted proof that the love and personality of his son had not simply vanished into the void. And so, as we let this story fade, as the image of that Cornish headland softens and the details of Doyle's life recede into the gentle quiet of the approaching sleep, perhaps we can hold a thought for this remarkable man. A man of immense talent and profound sorrow. A man who built the Temple of Reason and then spent his life trying to hear whispers from the other side of its walls. The mystery of the devil's foot root, in the end, is not about a real plant. The African arrow poisons, the Ordeal beans, they are fascinating echoes, real-world cousins to a fictional idea. But the true origin, the seed from which this terrible flower grew, was the mind of its creator, a mind that contained multitudes, the cool, analytical mind of the physician and the yearning, hopeful heart of the bereaved father. It is humbling, really, to think that a single human consciousness can hold such vast and seemingly opposing worlds. The world of clinical observation and the world of the séance, the world of hard evidence and the world of fragile faith. But perhaps they are not so different. Perhaps they are all just expressions of our deepest human impulse, to look at the vast, beautiful and sometimes terrifying mystery of existence and to try in our own small way to understand, to find a pattern, to tell a story that makes sense of it all. The mind of Arthur Conan Doyle was a crucible, much like that Cornish landscape, a place where the solid rock of scientific fact met the endless, mysterious ocean of faith. And in the heat and pressure of that meeting, he forged stories that have captivated us for over a century, stories of logic and stories of wonder. And as you lie here now, on the edge of your own quiet ocean of sleep, perhaps you can feel a similar peace, the peace of knowing that it is okay to hold contradictions. It is okay to have questions that have no easy answers. The mind is a vast and mysterious place, full of light and shadow, fact and dream. And for now, you don't need to solve any of its mysteries. You only need to let it rest, to let the waves of breath wash in and out, gently, rhythmically, to feel the solid ground of your bed beneath you, and to allow the great quiet tide of sleep to carry you away into the deep and peaceful mystery of the night.